the streets and in the hills above the South Bay, there is a different chase. A state fish and game warden who was shot during a raid on a pot farm is now telling his story for the very first time. His ordeal is part of a growing concern over hidden drug dens.
You know, it's just, I'll never forget every minute, every second, how visceral that incident was, because it was the first time I had been in a gunfight. More importantly, it was the first time we'd ever had somebody hurt. You know, the helplessness of knowing that if he doesn't get rescued soon, there's nothing more we can do. He's gonna die of blood loss, go into shock, and he was starting to show those signs. It's the Wild West. You would not think you're in California, right? And all of these folks now are surrounded by 10,000 or even more than 10,000 illegal grow sites, primarily Chinese and Hmong, some Mexican cartels. But then we would run into a handful of them that were in a really, what do I call a really aggro cell, aggressive. And we had a west side of the Santa Cruz Mountains in Silicon Valley, man, literally looking up to the west at the mountains above Meta headquarters and Cisco and eBay, no joke, where we had multiple gunfights. And you're looking at those mountains, and those are some of the most violent and vicious operators from the cartels that I'd ever run into.
What is going on, folks? Welcome back to the show. This week's guest is a cartel hunter himself, Mr. John Norris. John is a well-known leader and member of the Special Operations Unit known as MET, or the Marijuana Enforcement Task Force. This is a group of highly skilled game warden who are now hunting and combating cartels all throughout the state of California. Remember, if you guys enjoy this episode, be sure to leave us a 5-star review on Spotify or Apple, or if you're on YouTube, make sure to like and subscribe. Let's get into it. You know, given some of the viewers the background that, you know, may not be really familiar, can you maybe just kind of go through a macro idea of, you know, your background and what hidden war kind of is definitionally?
Yeah, I grew up right in the Silicon Valley, the suburbs of kind of the southern area of the Silicon Valley, where you have cattle ranches and hunting ranches and state parks and lots of wildlife. Kind of oxymoronic to think of the Silicon Valley having that, but that's where I was born and raised. My family's all settled in northwestern Montana, and after doing close to 30 years as a fish and game warden, my dream job, settled in Montana now, where I'm at full-time, still in California quite a bit, about probably 40% of the year, and then all over this country now doing what we're going to talk about today, which was something I never really anticipated going that direction, but things kind of blew up. And, you know, being a man of faith, I think there's a little divine intervention halfway through the career, and we'll talk about some of those things. But essentially became a game warden, and, you know, most people have a general concept of what a game warden does. I know game wardens in Texas are a big part of your state here. I mean, they're a huge agency. They're a fantastic agency. I work with game wardens here a lot. But we do a lot more than just check your hunting license, check your fishing license, and make sure you don't take too many fish or the wrong size, or, you know, a deer out of season. There's so much more, you know, that the job entails. And I spent 28 and a half years doing all those things, but then discovered my first Sinaloa cartel marijuana cannabis grow, you know, in a stone's throw from where I grew up learning to backpack in my home area back in 2004. And that, unbeknownst to me, would be this like hard pivotal turn to focus on a whole nother level of environmental crime that foreign, you know, basically eco-terrorists, the drug cartels, were now embedded in California. And unbeknownst to me, they were embedded in the rest of the country as well, doing that very crime. And now, of course, it's morphed into everything that's a priority of this new administration that I'm sure we're going to dive into, of what the cartels really mean as a threat to America, and how powerful and how wealthy and how efficient they are in every state of the union, including where we're sitting here in Dallas, Texas. So yeah, in a nutshell, that's what I did. And it led to a second book deal right when I retired in 2018. I had no idea Hidden War, the first edition, which is my latest book, would get the attention it did. And from people like Steven Ranella, very grateful for Meat Eater, and my friends over at Meat Eater. Joe Rogan got a hold of it. Meat Eater really wanted it in his hands, and he just blew up with it, basically, how do I not know about this? This is crazy. I'm a cannabis guy. I'm an elk hunter and cartels, and you're fighting them as game wardens.
Yeah.
I mean, in the Silicon Valley foothills, what the F is going on with that?
Well, that's what the hidden war is a perfect name for it, because it's precisely that. I mean, even people that I've mentioned in passing that I'm having you on that maybe weren't familiar with the work, and I'm like, oh yeah, it's essentially a task force or a special forces team that's looking to break down cartels. And they're like, oh, in Mexico. I'm like, no, in the U.S. And they're like, in the U.S.?
Where?
Like
what?
at the border?
yeah.
And I'm like, no, it's in California, Silicon Valley, right there. It's all over the country.
Yeah.
I know in Julian's show, he was like, that wouldn't happen in New Jersey. And Julian, I love you, but it probably would happen in New Jersey, in North Jersey, where I grew up, deep woods and stuff there. I know people were cooking up meth. It wouldn't surprise me if it's happening, pretty much in every state.
It really is, man. And it's one of those things that wherever the cartels can make money, wherever they can get a market, whether it's toxically tainted cannabis, and I'll talk about, when I use that term toxically tainted, the poisons they put on this stuff to keep things off of it in grow sites that, basically dries invisible on the plant, and then it gets harvested, it gets dried, and it goes out to consumers. All that, good weed we grow in California, because we're known for good wine and good weed. California is the weed state of really, I think, the world.
Yep.
So much of that comes back east into the black market for, kids, medicinal patients, recreational users. So 44 million Americans approximately, have some sort of recreational medical consumption of cannabis. And now we're dealing with stuff that's got like nerve agents on it, poisons that are so deadly, insecticides that are so deadly. They're felonies to possess in America now. We can't use them on our own crops. EPA determined 20 plus years ago that this stuff that was created for like farm and agriculture is nasty. Active ingredients are like nerve agents, some of the actual chemicals that the Nazis developed for their chemical warfare program way back in World War II. That's how nasty this stuff is. I mean, and when you see what it does to wildlife, mountain lions ingesting, just a couple drops of this stuff at the bottom of a plant in water, puncturing a water line in a drought to drink on a hot summer day, and the water's tainted inside the line. And I have pictures, a lot of color pictures in this new second edition that's behind me here. This is the second edition of Hidden War. I had to, we sold out of the first edition several years ago. We had to do a second edition, and what I did is I updated the currency of COVID hadn't happened when I wrote the first book. National pandemics and lockdowns, Reed, hadn't happened. And what did the cartels do when the world shut down and everyone went to lockdown and we were in fear of everything we didn't understand? They went, Disneyland free tickets, every ride's free, there's no lines, let's go.
Yep.
I mean, these cartels work in a culture of chaos, especially from what they've dealt with in Mexico, how brutal it is, how much they're constantly at war with each other, how they're constantly at war with the federales, with the Mexican authority, police. And so they knew that we would be basically hamstrung and crippled. And they went on steroids, not only on the weed trade, but that fentanyl started to blow up. Super meth, the new P2P super methamphetamine trafficking and cooks and distribution throughout the country just went haywire. And human and child sex trafficking just started to explode. And we didn't see that coming. And I've only been out of, operational agency life of 30 years, about less than a year. And boom, we're having lockdowns. And then the new administration comes in, right, in 2020. And all this hard border protection that President Trump's first term was focused on, steel was down on the southern border here, right in Southwest Texas. And right after I retired, I remembered we did the pilot film for my Thin Green Line film series. It's on my YouTube channel with Recoil TV. And just so everybody kind of knows, the publishing brand I work with, so my book is published by Caribou, which is the book division of Gun Digest, the magazine. And Recoil Magazine, Recoil Off Grid, Blade, all those different magazines and publishing group are all one entity. And I'm really blessed to be part of that group because they're wired right. They're wired for, legitimate Second Amendment principles, conservation, wildlife conservation, protecting our wildlife species, and public safety. So when I was down on the Southwest border now, and I've only, been retired a couple of months, and we're down there hunting on the Texas and Mexico border out of Calendaria, Texas. And I had no idea how thriving the cartel was right on that border. And as we're, couple of, retired snipers, me and one of my partners, one of my Delta team members, Marcos, as he's call signed in the book. We're down there hunting out at rams and long range shooting specifically, and the ethics of being long range shooters on a 50,000 acre beautiful ranch. I mean, I never thought there were Grand Canyon like canyons in the state of Texas, but brother, this ranch had it. And at the same time we're hunting this, the outfitters are telling us about, we have cartel border crossings all the time. We have coyotes, smuggling people, drugs, everything, right? They'd had a shootout with one of them where the outfitter's son, who's also a guide and a long range competitor, actually took a bullet during that gunfight with cartel people that came into the ranch house area in the property, and a gunfight ensued, and he still has a piece of bullet lodged behind his heart that'll never come out.
Jesus Christ.
And Walker Doherty, who just, what a great young man, just by the graces of the man above, survived that. Dude, it was nuts. And we're hearing these stories. And we're hearing when you get to the little Catholic church there with the little dim light right there, we're going to come meet you guys. Don't try to get there before dark and stay under the light. I'm like, what is going on? I don't have a kit anymore. I know the cartel's close. And the outfitters rolled in side by sides with tactical gear and assault rifles. And because they knew that whole ranch was a trafficking corridor, in that little tiny remote county. And then while we were on the ranch doing the hunt, and I talk about it in the book, and there's some actual pictures, we're off on one side triggering, ground sensors and cameras with big long range rifles in our backpacks, all camouflaged out. So Border Patrol are getting those images in real time going, oh my gosh, we have sicarios like working through the ranch. Well, meantime, 50,000 acres is huge.
Yeah.
While we're on this hunt stalking two really nice rams and talking about conservation and ethics, they're on ATVs with a helicopter overwatch running down like 15 smugglers with 100-pound bags of tainted weed, processed. They had some other narcotics. I'm not sure if they had fentanyl at the time, but there was meth involved, and they were trafficking people. And we were finding the caves with all the graffiti, the waypoints through the ranch that look just like grow and encampments that are hidden and camouflaged in like the California Silicon Valley foothills. And I went, this is the first time I've been down on the southern border. I mean, I've worked the cartel problem, home where I grew up on an environmental component, and that kind of forced us game wardens into it. But I hadn't seen it at ground zero, man. And when a Border Patrol chopper pilot landed right on top of us and realized we weren't cartel runners, and we met, and he said, yeah, I've heard of you and I've heard of your book, man. This is crazy, but we can't talk about it. But just little Alpine County down here in Alpine County, Texas, he goes, the numbers are ridiculous, what we're finding. And spread the word if you can. It's everywhere.
And numbers in terms of like individual crossings?
Yeah,
like
crossings, tons and tons and tons of narcotics coming across the border, whether it be methamphetamine or fentanyl and the weed, that's coming from Mexico because it's produced there as well as within our country. So they're kind of, they're basically doubling down because they know some of it's going to get interdicted. And that was a real eye opener. And then I think 2-3 weeks after that hunt and filming that pilot film for my channel, lockdown started and the pandemic hit. And that was a big shift. And so long-windedly, this new second edition updates and goes into the changes and the shift of what the cartels did then and what we've seen from the outreach component. I mean, obviously, I hadn't done podcasts yet. I hadn't got the message out on, guys like you being part of the thin green line, being a force multiplier to help spread the word. And now we're into about our fourth printing of that. My friend Jack Carr was gracious enough to write the foreword for this second book, and he just crushed it because he is a diehard conservationist as well, and a heck of a retired Naval Special Warfare SEAL operator. But he loves wildlife too, and even he was blown away. And he said, "I knew it was bad. I did not know it was that bad till I read Hidden War." And his daughters read Hidden War as well, and we're just like, "Wow, this is crazy." So Jack was really instrumental in helping push the message and part of that fight.
Can you detail the general impact that these drugs, I want to dive into kind of your early career and when everything kind of came to a head in 2004, but can you detail a little bit further on the impact that these have on just the environment in general? Because so many would think that
Yeah.
You know, you're just growing weed, and sure, there might be some chemicals and whatever, but I mean, as you were highlighting, there's some very vicious chemicals, but not only that, it's just the wrong chemicals used in the wrong area can have massive impacts on the ecosystem there.
Yeah.
And especially when there's no care in terms of, you know, how it's being implemented and how industrial it actually is. So can you dive into that a little further and just
Absolutely.
what the impact was you were seeing?
Absolutely. I'm glad you're bringing it up. You know, when you think of the illegal weed trade in California, you think, okay, these are like Vietnam era hippies. They're up in Humboldt County, you know, they're in the Emerald Triangle. They're growing a couple hundred plants. You know, it's kind of a Cheech and Chong thing. They just want to be left alone. They're making a little money, black market. They don't have to, you know, pay taxes on. You don't think of, you know, organized crime groups in battle dress uniforms with AK-47 rifles and other type of weapons from Mexico, from Sinaloa and other cartels, you know, embedded in these farms and then bringing up these EPA-banned neurotoxins like Furadan, Metaphos, Q-Furan. Those are just some of the trade names. And there's pictures, descriptions, and graphic color ones in the book so people can understand what these are, because you don't know when you could run across one of these. We're finding this on private land grows now that are run by the cartels all over California and Maine and Michigan and you name it. It's just blown up in the states that have regulated. But that stuff gets into the water because obviously they got to taint the plants. They don't want anything on the plants. Many times they'll put that chemical in these check dams or in doughboy swimming pools outside of an indoor grow site with these big hoop houses, say in Northern California, and they'll pump the water poison directly to the grow site. They'll take tuna cans and just where you have a little bit of leftover tuna oil inside the can, put a couple drops of carbofuran and put them out as little animal attractants. So if a black bear or a mountain lion or a black-tailed deer, let's say, walks up into the grow site and they may want to eat on part of the bud, which obviously is going to lose profit for these growers, they'll go ahead and they'll suck up that oil in the tuna can. They'll ingest some of the poison, and within 20 minutes, their body's having a central nervous reaction shutdown. They're frothing at the mouth. Their blood is being actually thinned because there's anticoagulants, and then there's a neurotoxin, a nerve agent, essentially. So they die a very violent death. And pretty much we say that anything that contacts that poison isn't going to do damage to the cash crop they're trying to protect because of how deadly it is and how potent it is and how fast acting it is. So you have that element, right? And then imagine that you get a couple tablespoons of this stuff in a creek that flows past the grow site. And a lot of these grows, even on private land, are on pristine creeks because they're in rural areas, or they go right into the underground aquifer when these illegal wells are dug.
Exactly what I was going to ask.
Yeah, you know, so it's not only surface water we're dealing with, but the real big push now, like in private land, and my friend Jorge Ventura, who's a News Nation journalist now, who's also on Julian's show, and really that was kind of the catalyst for us to connect on that show. I was up with Jorge Ventura and Sonic Basu, his producer and awesome cinematographer. And when he was with Daily Caller, we were doing the Narcotics documentary up in Siskiyou County. And this was 3 years after I had operationally retired. And I had worked with all those Siskiyou County deputies when I was the Met team leader for our marijuana enforcement team, our specialized tactical unit in California, Fish and Wildlife. But I hadn't done raids when I, retired. I did this. I educated. Now I can speak freely. I'm not under gag orders from California. I can talk nationally. So I integrated with Jorge. We did a bunch of content, a bunch of interviews, and then we went on a raid day with Siskiyou County Sheriff, like on that Friday, and we did like 4 search warrants and arrest warrants if we found what we needed. And it was mind blowing to see the magnitude of what had blown up in that county in just 3 or 4 years that I was out of operations, and the amount of water destruction. So California at the time is in their second largest drought in history. We were on water rationing, ranchers, farmers, old, World War II era veteran families that moved to pristine Siskiyou County with Mount Shasta in the background, one of the 7 natural wonders, glacier ice on it at 14,000 feet. And I mean, it's the Wild West. You would not think you're in California, right? And all of these folks now are surrounded by 10,000 or even more than 10,000 illegal grow sites, primarily Chinese and Hmong, some Mexican cartels that have just come in, bought that land, and now they're just sucking all the water underground dry. They're putting illegal wells in. They're using not only the carbofuran and the stuff the Mexican cartels use, but we started to see just within the last couple of years, Chinese chemicals with Chinese monikers on them from mainland China, 7 different chemicals, some antifungals, some rodenticides that are just as deadly. And now what they're doing, Reed, which is just absolutely sinister, is they're putting that chemical in like an empty paint can and they're burning it and creating a smoke aeration, if you will, while they're in Tyvek suits and they have the fitted N95, respirator masks, the same ones we're fitted for to go into these grow sites because it's a hazmat when you run across these poisons. I mean, you can blindness, respiratory failure, death if you don't get in and out of that thing quick or if you're exposed to it. And now they're burning this stuff like a smoke and it's going everywhere. It's seeping into the plants. It's on all the equipment. It's in the waterways. People downstream, downwind that live in the community, they're breathing it in. They're going to the ER with nausea and headaches and migraines, not knowing what's going on. Is it connected to this poison? Most likely. Mm-hmm. So that's the environmental impact. And when a couple tablespoons of, say, carbofuran, that's like crystal powder, you put it in a small tributary, a creek, that has migrating steelhead trout in it, a threatened endangered fish that's worth about $40,000 a fish at the federal level. If you were to put a monetary value, they're so rare now. You're talking 2 to 5 miles of creek destroyed. Every aquatic in that thing is dead, for a long time to come. And that's what we started to see in California. I went, what is going on in this creek, man? Mm-hmm. What caused this much damage? So the environmental impacts are exponential compared to somebody poaching a single deer. Somebody, diverting a waterway and drying out a stream and killing some things downstream, which is wrong because they're, they need it for agriculture. They need it for cattle. Maybe they're taking water illegally. They're doing a development that isn't done properly when they're building buildings or homes. But a cartel grow and the water destruction and just every day, it's a constant, what we call a Superfund site of destruction, killing the 3 Ws, wildlife, waterways, and wildlands at an exponential level. And that really got a shift and, became an attention point of mine, unplanned, of course, when we first started seeing this in the early 2000s.
Yeah, I mean, this is what I wanted to highlight too, is because I don't think people, again, even if they hear the impact, they might even think just a dead animal or even one river or whatever. But when you really start to look at it, it's these escalating factors as they build on top of each other. You were saying, God forbid one of those underwater wells, or it's connected to a well and all of a sudden it's in drinking water or, and it gets, utilized for on a farm and all the animals start ingesting it and that goes out to people. Or there's just so many different compounding factors that it can quickly have such a detriment on a society. And also you ignore it for long enough and you end up with, dead forests and dead areas, and it completely changes the agriculture and completely changes, the whole economy in an area. And it's just, I think it was just so profound reading that and hearing how detrimental the impact is. Because I also don't think people ever have that second level thinking of just how much it can compound and how quickly.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. It's an exponential thing because you have the impacts to the ground, right? You have the impacts to water, like we just talked about. The rough, and this is just an approximation, but for an outdoor cartel grow, private or public land in general, somewhere between 5 and 8 gallons of water per day are going to be needed for each plant till they're harvested. And that's an illegal grow. So that water is not, that's stolen water, just like it's a stolen crop or it's a stolen, income from, say, a legitimate regulated grower in California. And I'll use my old home state as a regulated state now. Basically in 2016, we regulated under Prop 64. We knew it was coming. A big portion of my job as a lieutenant and the team leader of the marijuana enforcement team was to do outreach and education. So I would do PowerPoint presentations and just speeches and talks to legislatures, conservation groups, animal rights groups, kids in high school at assemblies, you name it, all over the board. And I told everybody, including lobbyists and, governor's office staffers at the time, I said, we know regulations coming, man. And it could be effective in stopping the black market. That's the big selling point of regulating cannabis, right? Stop the black market, make it an organic product, make it affordable, et cetera. We don't want EPA banned toxics on our cannabis that our kids are trying out in high school or whatever and beyond. And I said, but when you regulate, guys, you got to keep the bite in crime. You got to keep the penalties for an outdoor trespass grower from the Sinaloa cartel or some greenhouse grower up north, whatever ethnicity. You got to keep it a felony, and go after it, because with the water stealing and the environmental destruction going on, you have so many compounded multi-level exponential crimes that aren't just, oh, it's illegal, so it's a crime, we're going to bust this guy for weed. Well, it's not even a weed issue anymore, right? Take the weed out of it. Just take the whole equation, oh, that's so 80s, just say no, right? People thinking, this is marijuana, man, come on. I mean, it's legal. It should have been legal 20 years ago. You're like, yeah, I don't disagree with that, but it needs to be legalized the right way. Mm-hmm. And we did it the wrong way in California. When we made it a misdemeanor for a cartel grower to have an illegal farm indoors or outdoors, and an infraction for a juvenile grower, and the cartels bring their young guys up, we would see 14, 15, 16, 17-year-old grower apprentice, if you will, in these grow sites. And, they may not be savage at first, and some of them may never be savage, but then we would run into a handful of them that were in a really, what do I call a really, really aggro cell, aggressive. And we had a west side of the Santa Cruz Mountains in Silicon Valley, man, literally looking up to the west at the mountains above Meta headquarters in Cisco and eBay, no joke, where we had multiple gunfights. And you're looking at those mountains, and those are some of the most violent and vicious operators from the cartels that I'd ever run into, that my teammates that we'd ever seen, that our dogs had to sometimes engage, that would fight our dogs, would target our dogs with fixed blade shanks or sharpened bones, to take those dogs out. Very aggressive. And they bring up their juvenile guys, and their juvenile guys have a automatic pistol on their side. Maybe they have a semi-automatic rifle. Maybe they're going to fight just like, their dad or their cousin or someone they're, being mentored under. And it's a culture of violence and chaos. So they're going to get credibility by being tough. Mm-hmm. So we knew we were going to see that. We had already seen it, but at least we had a felony statute. At least we could work with ICE agents. Very, very few of these growers were citizens of the U.S. I mean, I can't remember, maybe a handful at the most. So 90 plus of the people were engaging in these grow sites are all cartel operatives, smuggled across the border, cutting their teeth, making a living doing it down there effectively, learning to divert water, learning to camouflage the grow, learning to harvest, learning to defend it, learning to camouflage it, all of those things. And then now they're in my backyard, they're in your backyard, they're kind of spread out everywhere. And now we make it a misdemeanor, and we know nobody's going to jail. We're told we can't talk to ICE, we can't talk to Border Patrol as a state agency, as game wardens who were federally deputized as well. So we have federal authority under U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and under policy, we will support federal law enforcement agencies that ask for help. And that's what we're supposed to do. And when now you're not working with federal agencies because of a mandate, from the governor's office on down in California, and it's a misdemeanor, nobody's going to touch that. You're going to eradicate the grow. You're not going to arrest anybody 9 times out of 10. Those guys are going to be in the wind. They're going to be protected. They're not even going to get deported anymore. And now they're just going to be in another grow site. Maybe they're going to be on a meth cook in the winter. Maybe they're trafficking children. Because what we got to understand is it's not just a green dope crime. These are polycriminals. They're like a good way of putting it is like take a really good general contractor and all of his subcontractors to build a nice home, right? The complex we're sitting in today. One guy, he's the concrete guy. He's building the foundation. This guy's going to frame, right? Then this guy's going to come in and sheetrock and electrical and plumbing, and you're going to have all these diversity. That's exactly how they work. They're all part of the same group. They're all centralized and they're working for certain people, but one guy is trafficking fentanyl. Dirty labs, down in Mexico, distribution, hitting the West Coast, East Coast, wherever it's coming in. And that distribution center is locked down. It's very efficient. It's successful exponentially. We're talking billions, not millions, but billions of cash dollars. Another guy's doing the weed trade. This guy's doing meth. This guy's trafficking humans for work. this guy's trafficking children for the ugliest stuff we see, across the world. So we were on the tip of the iceberg when we were fighting the weed fight, which we still are. And for me being a conservationist, and, the saying we have in my family, my dad, my grandpa's saying is, the woods are my church. I grew up, learning to hunt at 9 years old. And it wasn't about, oh, you kill animals, so you hate animals. Exactly the opposite. Under the conservation model, if you harvest waterfowl or big game to consume, to feed your family with good meat, you do it humanely, you do it with ethics, you do it with gratitude, you fish and eat those fish, and you stay within those limits, and all that money and all that time we put into protecting those animals through ethical harvest. It sounds contradictory, but it's exactly the opposite, right?
It's a natural ecosystem.
Natural ecosystem. And now that we've got all these impacts on wildlife, cartels, development, just our population exploding, and open spaces and green belts going like this, we're the problem of destroying wildlife. We have no choice but to manage it now. Under the conservation model, our species will go extinct. They will die of starvation. It'll upset the predator, non-predator balance, plains game, all those different things. That's what the impacts were on the environmental side. And that's what really got me strongly passionate to fight these guys. We had no idea that fentanyl was a thing. We had no idea that these same growers were part of meth cooks, and I go into that in the book, of seeing how closely knitted they are and getting to debrief and interviews of a high-level plaza boss that was picked up for a 22-pound meth cook in the winter, but responsible for 50 or more grow sites of weed out in the national forest in Northern California. And now he's going to talk freely, provided, he might have a little bit of leniency. And he was very forthright. And I got to sit in and be part of that interview with the feds and Spanish interpreters and videotaping and the sheriffs and everything we needed to find out. He was very forthright in revealing. And we were right on a lot of stuff. But what I didn't realize is the magnitude of how embedded they were. And this is going back to we're talking 2012, 2011, and it's escalated exponentially since then, as you know. And I did not know how embedded it was. And I'm taking this, say my hometown of Silicon Valley is just a bullet point example for every state in the union, and every region, rural or urban, has that presence of cartel crimes and cartel products in every state. And when this guy is just laughing when I'm talking about, well, how do you get them across the border? How hard is it with border patrol? And, he goes, he laughed and said, we don't consider that border a border. That's just the division between Mexico North and Mexico South. And that thing you guys call the border, it's like a speed bump on the freeway. $4,000 to $7,000 out of my organization making millions gets my best growers, my best traffickers up here in 24 to 48 hours. Even if they're deported, even if they're arrested,
we're come right back.
We're going to get them right back. And these are the guys that aren't just minions. These are the guys that are vetted. Really good growers. They know how to divert water. They've done it under the federales and Mexican military's nose, say in Sinaloa Highlands. They've grown weed. They've used the poisons on it to keep everything off it. They've got it dried and processed and been able to distribute it out of Mexico. Then those guys they're the tier one guys, and they'll bring them across the border. And it was all California at the time, and now it's gone many other places. But we were right there next to the, San Diego southern border. No brainer.
Yeah.
And California is one of only 6 true Mediterranean climates on the globe. So we are the ideal outdoor sunshine state to grow the best cannabis on the planet. And so the cartel started there.
I have a plethora of questions with that.
Yeah, I threw you a lot.
No. I mean, there's just so many interesting points. I do want to come back to how California itself as a state was kind of handling it, but right off of here, because you're mentioning it, what is the interaction of the different cartels in terms of what you've seen? Because, everyone knows that Tijuana is a constant hotspot for cartel warfare because it's such a perfect crossing spot. Even down when you look south of the border right here, Juarez is a massive spot where they're constantly battling who can get supremacy. I would look at California, as you just mentioned, being one of the only Mediterranean climates, and there's up and down the state, so many perfect places to grow or cook or do anything. Is there consistent infighting or anything like that as well between competitive cartels, or they kind of...
There's some, much less than you're going to see in actual Mexico, and here's why. Once they get across that border, it's not advantageous to them to have a lot of infighting, because if you start having shootouts and you start having bodies disappear, somehow, some way, us on the law enforcement side are going to get wind of that. We're going to be investigating that. You're going to have eyes and ears, and even if it's really remote, you're going to have hikers and hunters and different elements of outdoor recreationalists that are going to come across that, and they don't want to draw that attention. Now, that being said, it's not to say it doesn't happen. I mean, we found dead growers in their tents that are a rival competing cell, maybe from the same cartel, maybe from a rival, got too close to the line or decided to take more territory. And you have murdered, cartel growers in the grow site. We've seen them on semi-rural properties in the affluent Silicon Valley foothills, a stone's throw from where I grew up, of, AK-47 rounds in a guy that was defined as a sheep herder on this ranch, who clearly wasn't just a sheep herder.
Yeah.
And now we come to find there's a cartel boss that's an American citizen. He's hiding in plain sight. He's very affluent. He's got a real piece of property. The whole first chapter, Hidden War, goes into this cartel kingpin that we worked for 15 damn years, from a murder that he was acquitted of, that was just a weird case. And now he's back at doing the cartel weed thing. And, certain growers are dying, and there's a bunch of different cartel faction growers all over his place. So we do see that. Ambushes set up, a lot of deception. What really has been the biggest liaison lately, and we're not seeing a lot of violence because it's more cooperative, is this collaboration between the Chinese crime groups and Sinaloa and Jalisco New Generation actually working together. And you never thought you'd see this, but when Jorge and I and Sognick were up doing the Narcofornia documentary in Siskiyou County, what had transpired since I retired, and even a little bit before that, 5 years previous, I'm going to say from about 2017, 2018, 2016 on, more and more influx of Asian crime organized groups flooding Northern California and taking over the indoor private land grows in these hoop houses with these new poisons. And I'm thinking, why isn't there an issue? Where's the Sinaloa growers? I mean, they haven't given up on this, because we're seeing them down in Central California. We're seeing them in Southern California. We're not seeing that, that Chinese or that Hmong element right now. And basically, the way my contacts in DEA described it, and they dropped this on me about a year ago, October, with right before I did my first of two congressional testimonies. There were two hearings in Congress that we can talk a little bit about that addressed a lot of this. Environmental impacts, cartels doing a lot of damage embedded throughout America, far north of our southern border. That was the first focus of the first hearing. It was called Protect Our Borders, Save Our Parks. I mean, I thought the congressman that put that together couldn't have named it better. And the next one was tribal, cartel impacts of tribal lands. Even in remote, last great part of the lower 48, the most remote state, my home state of Montana, and Sinaloa is right there on the Canadian border, affecting tribal groups. But I'll digress. Let's not get ahead.
Yeah.
I'll go back to that. But long-windedly, I'm answering your question. And now the collaboration is the Chinese want the weed trade because it's a cash business. And they want a ton of currency right here in America that they can launder, that they don't have to ship back to mainland China. Idea is, in theory, and it's being investigated. I don't know how far this goes, but they want to dominate basically the currency by 2035 and run a World Bank standard under the Chinese currency structure. And they can do that by having a whole lot of cash to start now. So they want to amass a ton of cash, and they're doing it. And what they're doing is, in exchange for them getting into the weed trade, which we're seeing a lot more of, not only in California, but all the eastern states, southwestern states, but now they're going to launder Sinaloa's money for less than they were paying before. Like on average, I've been told Sinaloa, Jalisco, any of those cartels making a ton of money off all their nefarious crimes, it's all cash. And the way they launder that to legitimize it, it costs them about 6% on the dollar to launder. Well, the Chinese came in and said, we'll do it for 5%. and, you bleed off and we want to get involved, in NorCal hoop houses in Siskiyou County, and we want to start amassing cash, and we're going to start trafficking our own people to work in these grow sites and stuff like that. And then as the relationship got better and more effective, it was, okay, now you're paying 4. Now you're paying 3. And now it's down to they're not paying anything. Chinese are doing it for them for 0 and supplying the precursor chemicals for fentanyl, because we know so many of them come from China. Mm-hmm. Because right now, Sinaloa, Jalisco, a lot of these cartels are really making a ton of money off that fentanyl pill, that dirty pill that every, second, third one's going to kill you, coming from a dirty lab. But they're making, say, in downtown Dallas, Texas, San Jose, California, where I just flew in from, say Bozeman, Montana, one of the larger populated areas of a very, very small populated wilderness state, my home in Montana, about $5 a pill, right? And millions of pills can be trafficked in such a small container.
So easily. And
the addiction rate, and now, Reed, the last figure I had a couple months ago, again from my DEA friends, was 74 to 75,000 Americans a year are dying from these fentanyl overdoses from these dirty pills, and a year.
Yeah.
And I sort of do the math because I have relatives, that fought in the Vietnam War, and 10 to 12 years of conflict in Vietnam, which was a heinous war the way it was just
had someone on with that.
Yeah, right. Yeah. The logistics of jungle warfare and how much we didn't know about that environment and how much the VC and the NVA did. Just sharing war stories I was not privy to. I didn't experience it myself. I'm too young. But Dad and all my uncles and all the other relatives, that had an impact over there or tried to. It blows my mind. 55,000 Americans lost their lives over 12 years of an absolutely brutal war that we fought forever. And 20,000 more than that per year are dying from fentanyl in our own borders, right? And that's about, 200 people a day? So we're going to have 20 deaths or more in the duration of having this great conversation, finally meeting face to face.
Even GWAT as well. You look at GWAT.
Yeah, Global War on Terror.
More than GWAT.
We didn't have that many losses. Yep. No way, not even close. Over the whole duration, 20 years in Afghanistan, I don't know what the number is. I had it recently, but I'm sure we could, for those of you out there, it wasn't that much. It wasn't that many bodies, but it would be interesting to know if you can pull that up. How many we lost, in Afghanistan and Iraq during the 20-year GWAT window. But when we look at numbers like that, and you look at the precursors that those Mexican cartels need to make that deadly but super lucrative product, now you have a collaboration that's just decimating us. Because now you have all this money being laundered in Middle America for 2 highly efficient criminal organizations getting rich. Addiction, death, erosion, morale's dropping, depression, all these different things that they're kind of just eroding from within the country. And that's heartbreaking, man, to know how that we haven't even fired a shot in our own borders. We haven't technically gone to war and had it a military engagement against a Chinese military force or a Mexican military or a cartel, counterterrorism force or anything like that. We haven't anything like that. But how many people are dying, just a quiet hidden war death. Yeah. And so that's the main issue we have right here, and it's at our expense.
Well, I just had Nick Eftimiadis on. He's former CI case officer. Now he's kind of the premier expert in everything that's with Chinese espionage and everything. And we talked about this because I was curious. I was saying, what is the connection with the cartels? And he's saying, twofold. One, the millionaires love funneling their money out of China and into the U.S. So they have a little bit more structure, and they also kind of be able to get a little more control here. Yeah. And so they're paying these cartels millions to be the guys to, hey, get my money over and do all this. Yep. And the criminal organizations. But the other thing, this is one of those, ideas of the geopolitical chess match is that just like every company in China, the CCP has their hand in it. Even if they say we're not involved, they know what's going on. Yeah. Anything that leaves that country, they know what's going on. And so if you're looking at it from, how it's progressed as well, the rumors were circulating, in 2018, 2019. It's like, oh, there's cooks down in Michoacan or any of those areas, and they're Chinese cooks. And now all of a sudden they're in California, they're in Montana, like they're moving up and they're inside the U.S.
Yeah.
And, like you're saying, if you want to win a war without firing a shot, you disable the people. You take down, all the citizens.
Perfectly said. Yeah.
Make them no longer feel comfortable or even, confident in their country and their leadership. And this is the perfect way to do it.
It was one of those things. And it's so crazy that when I retired operationally at the end of 2018, who could have foresaw what was going to happen through COVID? Mm-hmm. Who could have foresaw what was going to happen with the crazy the last two campaigns, and from the first Trump era to the Biden era, now back to Trump, and just everything that Americans faced and saw either firsthand or indirectly. I mean, it's a pivotal time in history, and it's the most chaos because of what you just said. Because we have so many foreign enemies domestically embedded now, and it is a hidden war. And you're right. That's one of the reasons we named the book that. I had to. I said, because we've been at this 20 years. I have a first book called War in the Woods that came out that got into all this at, the agency sanctioned when we were still operational, as we're doing mainline game warden work. And now, we're starting to help the sheriffs, and we're getting in a gunfight. My partner shot and almost dying in my arms and things like that. Documentaries, a couple of NRA, Patriot Profile, Life of Duty documentaries on this that got pretty good reach. National Geographic's Wild Justice Game Warden reality show that was California's Game Warden reality show. Uber hit on Nat Geo, went all over the world, and we did 3 seasons. And those last 2 seasons, you saw myself and you saw, Brian Boyd and K9 Phoebe. You saw all those guys. And a lot are codenamed only in the book because they're still operational. All the Met guys doing this stuff before we were a formalized own team, and people were blown away by it. But I still to this day get people going, they pick up the book and go, or they hear the podcast and like, I heard you on Reed Show. I got the book, and like, Lieutenant, how did I not know anything about this? I'm hearing it for the first time in, Virginia or North Carolina. And I'm like, wow. Okay. So just inundated with so much data, so much knowledge, so many things are going to get the spotlight in, whatever, mainstream media event like we talked about before we started recording today. That's the beautiful thing about the podcast circuit. People are starting to trust this a lot more, thankfully. Mm-hmm. And you guys are getting more real, raw conversations out, unfiltered, without an agenda, which just the knowledge is power has been my motto, and don't get me wrong, man. I miss pushing a carbine with my guys. I still see and hunt 4-legged predators with them, but the pen is mightier than the sword. And at the end of the day, we make more change by informing people and getting more policy changed, I think, by having the conversations you and I are right now, which I'm so grateful to have with you today, and I appreciate it, to really make this thing what I think we're starting to see now under the current administration. I have a lot of backstory on that. Happen where this is a priority, like war on the cartels. What does that mean? We're going to talk about it, I'm sure. And now it's finally getting, administrative attention as a domestic priority. And that's what I've been pushing for even before retirement. And now to see it happen and flesh out how that's going to look and already see the immediate improvements we've seen even in the last 55 days has been really cool. But we can talk. Yeah, there's something to dive into.
It makes all the difference because I was saying this all the time. I mean, I've said it on the show plenty of times. I just say this with buddies in conversation where it would blow my mind that the cartel problem wasn't key in every conversation because, I said, you go to San Diego and you go to the border, you can see Sinaloa cartel operatives just moving very freely to the point where it's like, I could probably hit him with a football.
Yeah.
If I don't have a great arm, but they're right there. I've seen videos, border agents, they're literally looking at them, right at each other. Sometimes the cartel just take pop shots at them because what are they going to do, Yeah. And it just blows my mind. And I say that, I'm like, guys, we talk about the Middle East all the time. We have one of the most industrial, militarized groups south of the border, again, that you can see if you just go walk right up to the fence. They're right there.
It's not hard to find them.
And people just don't take it as seriously. They just don't look at it and say, holy shit, there's and we can talk about this now, there's a literal terrorist organization operating right outside of San Diego, right outside of any of the border towns that you want to pick. And, the country next to us is essentially a narco state at this point.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. And it's not even, the big thing when I was in Congress for the first testimony, the big focus, and I saw it on both sides of the political fence of the congressional delegates, the big thing was we got to get this border under control. Clearly it isn't under this administration. That's rhetoric. We know what's really going on. Our border agents know what's going on. We got to control it. And that was certainly an issue. I mean, it was heartbreaking to see what was happening on the southern border when administration changed. And I mentioned being down there right before that happened, when some of the material, the raw steel was there for that little part of Calendaria that they were going to start a wall. And I could see it as we were going onto the ranch. I'm like, okay, the wall's starting. And yeah, it's not going to stop it, but I was definitely for a wall because it's an impediment that can get us to concentrate on the problem with technology and enough people on the ground to hold back the tide, right? And then to see that completely flip-flop and go, okay, it's not a border issue anymore. And I was doing that in Q&A with the congressional delegates after my speech. I went, the point is, I'm telling you Silicon Valley stories from like 8, 9, 10 years ago.
Yeah.
It's been a long time, guys. And now I'm telling you Northern California stories from 3 years ago. And it's gotten even worse. And we're getting ready to do more work up there and this and that. I said, the last figure I saw last night with the new administration calculating 22 million illegal border crossings, undocumented individuals from numerous parts of the world, not just Mexico, made it in. So it's beyond a border issue. It's a domestic embedded issue. Now, not everybody there is here for nefarious reasons. I get that. I always preface this part of the conversation with, this is an anti-immigration talk in any way. We're all pro-immigration. Solid policy, chase the American dream. I'm an immigrant. We all
make
are.
it easier too for the legal immigration.
No
one is against that,
man. I agree, and that's what makes America so great. That's what makes us so lucky, I think, compared to the rest of the world. But a percentage of those individuals that came across were here for crime reasons, and now they just got across a lot easier. Whether it was Sinaloa, Least New Generation, any of the Chinese factions, they're all here, and now the other gangs that are popping up that have been defined, MS-13, Trail Iguana, as you say it, those guys, they're everywhere, and now that we have that embedded problem, we're not only stiffening up the border protection exponentially, which has been fantastic, but now we're at the point where the gloves are kind of off for law enforcement. The debate on how much military is going to be used within borders, which you couldn't do for direct action type stuff before the definition changed to classify these groups as terrorists. But we are seeing a change. I think, the last figure I saw and researched the last couple of days, the border, has seen less encounters than a 25-year period than now. And there's 6,000 military operatives working with Border Patrol, working with local agencies down on the southern border. And it's making a difference. You can't just solve the problem by throwing bodies at it, but I'll tell you what, you have to have enough bodies to even make a dent. I know that from being an operator, for coordinating missions, small or large. And what happened the last 4 years was just heartbreaking to them and everybody else, when it was wide open and they were processing immigrants or illegal immigrants, is how my Border Patrol buddies would say it. They said, we feel like we're legal smugglers.
Yeah.
This is crazy.
Why do your stories too? The cartel
Just
would
horrible.
Smuggle people purposely to get caught so that the Border Patrol would have to go through the whole process and still let them go.
Yep.
But the guys that we want to actually catch that, are coming in with the drugs or even just not even if they have anything on them, but that's going to be the grower. That's going to be the guy that's going to go set up shop and pick whatever state.
Yep.
He's the one that gets away because they purposely, I've heard they'll throw people in the water and and just crazy things like that, just so they can assure that their guys get in the U.S.
Yep. It was really easy. Fortunately, it's getting a lot harder real quick, thankfully, with this change.
So let's bring it back to the beginning too, because we kind of went through everything, but I really would love to highlight your first time coming across one of these grow sites and how that really shifted the game. Because, as you highlighted, you had been a game warden for a number of years. You've kind of went through a lot of the typical stuff that you may see as a game warden, but this is where everything changed.
Yeah, it's a good way. It was like that big, I call it going from the light to the darkness.
Mm-hmm.
It was like this complete process of a whole nother thing going on, doing half a career, I'm going to say close to 13, 14, 15 years of doing the, hook and bullet stuff where you're taking people down that are intentional poachers, not the person out there with their daughter making a mistake of catching too short of a fish and not knowing. I mean, there's a letter of the law and there's a spirit of the law. And one thing we pride ourselves as being good game wardens on is, give a break to someone who deserves it and make a friend, make a force multiplier on that thin green line. We're known as the thin green line, being very thin because there's so few of us, holding back the tide of a loss of all of our triple W's: wildlife, wildlands, and waterways. Now, so in 2004, there I was back at home in my home area of Silicon Valley. I started in Southern California, Riverside County, had a very dynamic career of the first 3 years, fresh out of the academy, had never lived down there, didn't know anything about the area except where Disneyland was in Anaheim. And
I grew up in Santa Cruz, so
there you go.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
And when our captain, when we were getting our positions, those of us that were sponsored and hired cadets halfway through the academy in 1992, said, okay, on a Friday afternoon, we got our assignments where we knew we were going to be going, 8 weeks in the future and start FTO if we graduated the academy. And it was, okay, so you're going here, Graf, you're going to Orange County. Oh yeah, I'm from Orange County. I was a lifeguard, guys, all these lifeguard guys, buddies of mine, they're going back to, coastal areas because they needed game wardens there. Mm-hmm. So they went home. And I'm thinking, I'm not going to get to go home. I'd love to work my backcountry in Henrico Park, where I met a game warden and got inspired for the job and that kind of deal. And he goes, okay, Mr. Norris, you're going to Lake Elsinore. And I said, I thought I heard Lake Almanor, and I knew Lake Almanor was this pristine mountain lake way up in the rural, like that Siskiyou County area. Yep. And he goes, I got this grin, and he said, oh no, I didn't say Lake Almanor. I said Lake Elsinore. That's down in Riverside County. And I just hear my park lifeguard buddies that are lateraling over to be game wardens. They're laughing. I'm like, what's so funny, man? Well, Riverside County, tons of crime, gangbangers coming over from the LA basin into Riverside County, spotlighting animals, killing anything that crawls or falls, you name it. And that's what I was dealing with a lot of, and just a lot of jump into the deep end as a new young game warden and learn hardcore anti-poaching traditional stuff, but tactically, dealing with gangs, dealing with automatic weapons, dealing with drugs, interdicting a lot more things than just a deer killed out of season that night or, 5 rabbits, a gill net to take all these illegal fish. All that was huge and very important, but there was all this peripheral stuff. In 2004, a good friend of mine, call sign GI, I won't say his real name, but he was a family friend that grew up with us and was a wildlife biologist, San Jose State alumni like me, a little bit younger. And he's doing a study on a real pristine, it used to be a private hunting club for deer and a cattle ranch. And now it's owned by a county agency that's just going to, open it to the public eventually, but it's this wide open track with 2 beautiful creeks. And they're fed right out of some creeks that come out of Henrico State Park, which is my alma mater where I grew up learning to backpack. So that was near and dear. And he calls me on like a Monday morning and goes, dude, I don't know what's going on, but one of my creeks is bone dry up there. It's April. It's winter runoff. Creeks are flowing great. They should be flowing great. Someone's blocked the water up top. I'm like, okay, happens a lot. It could be anybody. It could be somebody doing a development. It could be somebody impounding water to make a pond illegally. It could be, a cattleman taking water he's not supposed to. We don't see a lot of that, but we've had it occasionally. Most of our, cattle families in the Silicon Valley are I work very closely with several of them, and they are epitome of conservation, but they'll turn in stuff like that, and they'll have cartel grows on their ranches, which we've had a lot of. But I said, well, hey, get in the truck, man. We're going to go up top of the mountain, find a good place we can dive off, and let's check this out. And I put him in the truck. And at that time, we could have ride-alongs, we could have people, what we call, force multipliers, what I call them as informants. And it would be people like GI that was intimately familiar with an area, had a biological background, a love for wildlife anyway, was a hunter, was an angler, was tactically savvy. But now he's doing his master's thesis on these yellow and red-legged frogs, threatened and endangered, steelhead trout, all those different things, but in our backyard where we grew up. So we go up top of the mountain, we dive down roughly where we think the headwaters of the creek will be, so we don't want to shoot below it. Mm-hmm. We want to go to the top, and it's just a good strategic way to find what you're looking for. But tactically, it gives you the high ground, right? If you come down with some field craft and come down quietly and you don't get detected, you're going to be on the high ground and you're going to have tactical advantage. You're also going to be able to escape easy with your back trail and things like that. And we got down to what was one of the most pristine creeks in my backyard I'd never seen growing up there. Just gorgeous. Big canyons, cliffs, moss rocks with beautifully flowing water on them, And then we found the impoundment, a man-made dam, visqueen lined with black plastic, black poly pipe, the half-inch black, what I call grower special. That was the first time seeing that type of pipe that's indicative of a cartel grow. And then that's going down the creek. And below the dam where that pond was made, it's dry, but everything's in a hose.
So what did you think when you first saw that?
First thing I thought is, okay, this is really kind of like a roughshod, almost like a quote unquote like redneck dam, but a really effective one. Mm-hmm. So I thought somebody was diverting water for an illegal pond, probably to water livestock. Or I didn't think, we'd never seen anything like a marijuana grow with a diverted water system like that. Unbeknownst to me, I was about to step in my first Sinaloa grow. Mm-hmm. I was in a Sinaloa grow. And I hadn't seen it either. And so we go down carefully, but that was one of those days that even though I expected to find something sedate, I still had a real weird feeling. I'm like, spider sense, your hair's tingling on your neck.
That gut feeling.
You got that gut feeling when you hunt bad people, when you hunt animals, whatever, in the woods, when you really connect and you really connect in a natural environment, especially a pristine area. Mm-hmm. And I do it to this day. I'm on ranch patrol several times a week when I'm in California for problem coyotes, wild hogs that are doing massive land damage, and coyotes that are taking cattle calves and tule elk calves on, some really, really sensitive tracts of land in the Silicon Valley. And there's days that you're just electrified in the dark, moving into place because you can feel it. When you do it enough, you connect with the earth to a certain level. It sounds kind of weird in a way, but it's true. You just connect. And all the hunters and conservationists out there, know that. That's what I felt in a weird way. So I was on high alert. I felt it too, because he was down there alone all the time doing these studies, water studies, transects, looking at the small, the next generation of frogs, the steelhead fry, that the steelhead come all the way up from the ocean, Reed, the Pacific Ocean, mm-hmm. go through these rivers, then creeks, then tiny little tributaries, and lay their eggs in the sand beds of these creeks and go back to the ocean. It's massive, and they might do 20 to 50 miles. And then these steelhead fry are hatching around that time of year. Well, this creek is dry, mm-hmm. so everything's dead in it.
Yep.
He had been in there for months, even like the year, for many, many months. So he felt it too. He's like, whoa, man. So he's quiet. He had good tactics, stayed behind me. He's unarmed, obviously. We work our way down that creek bottom, and we're doing it very carefully, staying inside the creek, but, the banks are kind of cut out so you can kind of hide against an edge. And then we spotted him. 2 guys that just looked, they were something out of, footage from the Sandinista Nicaragua conflict in like the jungles of South America. I'm like, what are these dudes? Green BDUs, definitely from a Latin country, either Mexico or maybe South America. They had, I didn't see it. I could make out like a belt. I didn't know it that later on I would find growers with those braided belts that would have Jesus Malverde, Santa Muerte, the different patron saints that they worship, that are their deities, that insulate them from hindrance of their blessed criminal activities like growing tainted weed or trafficking humans, whatever. But they were wearing those type of things. And the guy in front had like a small machete, and he had a sheath for the machete, and he was checking water lines, and he was kind of looking around, making sure the water lines to marijuana plants were good. The plants were about 18 inches tall. And the guy behind him had the rifle, and he's just scanning, covering the guy in front of him. And he's actually moving very slowly, tactically, and checking over his shoulder behind him as a tail gunner would in one of our tactical stacks on any operation, whether it's a MET team, a SEAL team, any of the, law enforcement teams working the border patrol, just a standard tactic. And they don't even know anybody's there. And they're being silent. They're, kind of doing movements. They're nodding to each other. They're kind of got that intuitive connection where they're not even whispering, not even throwing hand signals. And they were getting very close and coming around one corner. And there was one crossing in the creek, and they were just above the bank of the creek where their plants were. And I have my AR and I have a red dot. And I see his gun, the rifleman in the back. The guy later we would find during the raid, we would see signs of a pistol holster and stuff like that, which I never saw that day. But this is great. If they get any closer and they see us, and this is their environment now.
Yeah.
I mean, they put some time into this, right? We've seen the plants. Both banks are covered in them. I went no for 3 weeks later when we would bring in a narcotics task force and guide them into the area with multiple agencies, that there would be the hidden tents with camouflage paint on them, the tarps into the cut banks, the propane bottles, the stoves, all the excrement in the creek, just the train wreck of pollution that they put in there. Didn't know anything about the EPA banned poisons, but they were all over that grow. Mm-hmm. We just didn't know how to define, how to identify them, if we were exposed or not. We were very new, I mean, it was infantile growing pains now to get to know this problem. And I thought they were going to see us coming close, and they got about 15 yards away. I'm on gun. It's that
prepping to engage.
It's that adrenaline dump. Your heart's racing, but I'm like, okay, it better not go to this. This is going to be a hard one to explain to my bosses. if I can get anything out, because we didn't have radio coverage, we didn't have cell coverage. We're in a deep canyon. We wouldn't get coverage until we got to the top of the hill, back to the truck. But they didn't detect us, thankfully. They tended their plants. They made a turn and they went back up the hill. Mm-hmm. And I would later learn they were going toward their camp, and I later learned that it was a 7,000 plant grow. It was big.
Do you know how many individuals, I mean, this would be the other thing to think about, I'd be thinking about as well, is, obviously you're seeing the two there, but they could
where's
have
the others?
Yeah, exactly. You could have other guys that are patrolling around, and, very commonplace as well. So was there ever, was it just two, or did you guys ever find out how many were?
That day we can't say for sure, because we didn't stick around to go into, the center of the grow. But it's a great question, because we saw the two, and I didn't know that's pretty common practice. You get two vetted growers in there to start the grow, to tend the grow, and will pretty much run that grow if it's manageable by themselves. And then about harvest time, they'll bring in what we saw in 2005 when we had our first gunfight, which was a real pivotal one that I'll just allude to in a minute, when my partner was shot near fatally, where that day we knew we'd find two growers, but there were more than two growers there. There were armed gunmen, there were the defenders that were there to defend the grow from us, from public members stumbling across it, from probably rival gangs or cartel patch pirates from coming from another cell, any of the above. That day, though, I was concerned about that. So when they disappeared, we didn't just boogie out of there. We held tight for a while. We let the area quiet down, and we moved back very tactically up the creek, stayed to the creek so we didn't silhouette ourselves on either side of the canyon, and then just made sure we had a good mountaintop or a nice rolling hill between us and what we had seen below with those two growers to work our way out uphill and have coverage and, kind of do an informal abounding overwatch, or what you call leapfrogging. It's just a standard tactic where one person moves and the other guy watches their tail and, use concealment and cover and things like that. It's just Fieldcraft 101. It's not really top secret stuff. And every animal hunter or outdoor enthusiast that has to stalk knows it, even if you're not doing it for, law enforcement or military reasons. And we got back to the truck undetected. And then, it was like, what did we just see? Let's get out of here. Let's get coverage. And then we raided it 3 weeks later, and we learned a lot. We learned how these guys operate with the encampments, how they divert water. We would later learn about the poisons not long after that. We raided it. We found the guys in the grow, set up, did an announcement at 50 yards. I wasn't running the operation. Obviously, I brought in narcotics task force guys that I had never worked with, because I never had a drug case like that related to cartel weed. So Reed, the crazy part was, I'm like, we got to try to catch these guys. And that wasn't the priority. If we could do it conveniently, safely, we would. Our mission was to go in and get the plants taken out and destroy them. And when we did that, we got 7,000 plants eradicated. And the team leader for the task force called in a Pavehawk helicopter from Moffett Field, because counter drug task force from the National Guard, 3rd and 7th Special Forces guys, as well as those Air Force chopper pilots, were deployed right up the road from me in the Silicon Valley. One of the best things about growing up in the Silicon Valley is after 9/11, a couple of us game wardens would be like, wow, we better start learning tactical skills, because there's going to be a need for tactically trained team level guys that can do, whether it's active shooter engagements, whatever game wardens, we got to serve our own search warrants. I kind of thought we'd probably need a tactical team of some sort. I was certainly had an affinity for that type of work and training. I didn't know it would be related to a cartel marijuana thing, but eventually that started way early, brother. And we have a lot of good teams, full-time teams in the Silicon Valley, including the military to support us. So I'm learning about all these assets the narcotic task force guys have from other agencies and going, we're going out on a Pavehawk. We're hoisting in, man, in a Pavehawk that was just in Afghanistan. That's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
But we just left, and the water diversion's still there. We didn't repair the creek. Mm-hmm. Everything's still dead downstream. Big 50-pound, 100-pound bags, tons of them of fertilizer and other poisons.
Just
EPA ban carbofuran, the encampment, it's all there. We didn't catch anybody. Those guys got away. Within a day of us leaving, I'm sure they were picked up by their boss and put in another grow or put on another, maybe a meth cook. Who knows? Mm-hmm. We didn't know how it worked then. And now we knew, and I'm like, okay, well, I'm a game warden, man, and I know right now that stuff is an environmental train wreck that's going to continue to destroy long after we're all gone. So that had to be my focus. And it wasn't a thing then, and it wasn't expected to be. To the Department of Justice, they're not seeing that environmental impact and the resources to do that job with as many grows in California. They couldn't spend their time doing it. It was understandable, but I would meet some really good sheriff's agents from my local sheriff's department that were on their special operations unit and their marijuana enforcement team that were guests of that mission. So even though I learned a lot and I thought we could have done a lot better job from the interests of conservation and public safety, I met some brothers for life on that mission, and they would soon find out what we were capable of and how we operated in the woods, and would get called, hey man, we got to grow. I want to start working with you and your guys. This is great. And in 2005, on August 5th, a date I will never forget, and I referenced in A Hidden War, and I go into the detailed chapter in the first book, War in the Woods. Myself, 2 young game wardens, an awesome game warden, call sign Mojo in the book, and Bulldog, the other game warden that both came out of the academy close to the same time, and joined our squad. And I'm a lieutenant now. I've just promoted to be a supervisor of 2.5 counties, all the game wardens in them, about 7 or 8 of us. And I'm helping the sheriffs that I met a year before on that mission. And they said, we think it's going to be 5,000 to 10,000 plants. And there were 3 sheriff's deputies, 3 of us wardens, an unarmed ranger. And we've scouted it. We know it's there. And we're going to clear it safely. If we can catch anybody, we will. If not, we're going to clear it and eradicate it. And we're going to do that. That morning was deep into harvest time. There were a lot more gunmen on that mountain than anybody could ever anticipated. And going through a second grow site that we crawled into with a little bit strategic advantage that the bad guys had, one of the gunmen in a hidden position, slightly fortified, got one shot off with an SKS or AK-47 derivative. And that round went through Mojo. It went through my partner's legs, entered in his left thigh. And a 7.62 by 39 steel core AK-47 round is made to penetrate. So It did what it was designed to do, penetrate and tumble. So it's tumbling through his leg, tumbles out of his inner left leg, and then tumbles through like a boomerang into the inside right, outside right. So he's bleeding out of 4 holes. And that bullet has done massive tissue damage where he's lost grapefruit or big orange size chunks of tissue out of his inner thighs. And one shot goes off and he drops and he's pissed and he's screaming, I've been hit, blah, blah, blah. And now a gunfight ensues and I hear my sheriff's partners and their M4s light up and I can't see them because we're in 6-foot marijuana plants. We're 2 or 3 yards apart doing a skirmish line through this grow. manzanita in front of us, and I can just see plants moving from the flash hider of all the gases coming out of two M4s as my partner Apache and Snake, their call signs, Brothers for Life, are engaging another suspect that's got a sawed-off shotgun, unbeknownst to me, 7 yards ahead, trained on me and another game warden on Bulldog. And we now find out that another grower, that guy's partner, realistically, was the gunman that shot my partner. And I'm trying to support my guys, seeing what they're shooting at. I'm seeing movement, and here comes what we think is Mojo's grower coming out to continue to finish off or see what he started. And then I'm in an engagement for the first time with my M14. And that whole 8 to 10 second gun battle and that little chain reaction for only one shot being fired from the bad guy, tragic hit on my partner. But what a rock star of a survival mindset did he have? I mean, he's on the ground. He can't hold his M1A up. It's too heavy, but he's got his left hand holding where he feels the biggest wound on his inner right thigh, and his Glock's out, and he's covering himself and the rest of the team, and he's pissed off, but he's hurt very badly. And that would lead to a 3-hour air rescue, us trying to pressure bandage to keep the bleeding down. We couldn't stop it. This was before anticoagulant. It's 05. The quick clot and the C-lock stuff that they were using in the military in the sandbox for the GWAT hadn't really trickled over to us.
Not even expecting an engagement
so,
like that.
Yeah, so other than a couple of extra Israeli bandages that Apache, who was a sniper and a Marine Corps veteran, he had extra things. We didn't have the trauma stuff that we needed. Working together with these guys for the first time, and it could have been a lot worse, but of course we were not equipped for what we ran into. By the good graces, Mojo survived. Great career, lieutenant, great family, warden of the year many years later. Incredibly proud of him. Haunted by the injury that day for him, and watching him and doing the first aid on him and talking to him and just dialoguing. We had a deer baiting case set for the next weekend, because the next weekend was our deer season opener, the traditional stuff. And he's like, I'm gonna be healed up. We're gonna do that. We're gonna do that case. I'm like, all right, man, let's just get you off this hill. And I was terrified that we weren't getting off that hill. And 3 hours later, we finally got an air rescue, and he went into surgery, and it was a week and a half or more in the hospital, longer. And first time we've been involved in gunfights, couple of weeks off, and a lot of processing of what I just saw. And that was the catalyst to say, we have a new element of danger that is far more violent and far more deadly than your average, American citizen poacher, not to lessen their potential danger, because we've had a lot of warden fatalities from those very type of poachers. But now I saw a foreign invader. I'm starting to learn about the Sinaloa cartel. I'm starting to learn how organized, how widespread they are. I'm starting to work with agencies like DOJ, Bureau of Land Management, U.S. Forest Service, the intel groups out of the Sheriff's Department, Homeland Security, U.S. Coast Guard for the panga boats offshore that are bringing in weed as well, and operatives and drugs and people. And I'm like, whoa, man, we're not in Kansas anymore, Toto. This is crazy.
This is when they started to ramp up too. Sinaloa really started to become Sinaloa right around this time. It's when El Chapo became El Chapo.
Yep. And they were really dominating the weed trade at that point, right? I mean, Narcos season 3 gets it right. Season 1 and 2, with everything with the Medellin and the coke cartels, and then when they went to Mexico in that show, and working with some of the guys that were in Narcos, the agents, my buddy Steve Murphy and Javier, that took him. That took old Pablo down, and doing his podcast and gang conferences with him. And I go, that show didn't get it wrong. He goes, no, they did a pretty damn good job with our story. And I said, but man, when they got the weed trade, brother, and Mexico right on our southern border, I'm like, this is weird. It's like flashbacks. Yeah. It's like watching us in a documentary again, but they got it right. To your point, that's when he was exploding the weed trade, not only growing it down there, like you mentioned, the Michoacan area, those highlands. And we didn't know he was the king, kingpin number one for all the American gross. We didn't know that. It wasn't mainstream law enforcement knowledge if you weren't doing that for a priority. And now we were starting to slowly edge that way.
Because he was evolving the business tactics as well. Like his whole thing was he was creating those tunnels. He revolutionized how drugs were getting trafficked. But, obviously it's horrific for us, but you look at it in terms of like the business sense, moving operations into the U.S., you're cutting out a ton of the middlemen. You don't got to worry about trying to traffic pounds of weed over the border now.
We're just losing it at the border. It's one less hurdle.
It's genius. And it's just crazy that it's like, you know, and I got a plethora of questions too that I want to get back to, but it's crazy how systematic they truly became. And, you know, this is the beginning of that era where it's these operations are becoming, you know, a pivotal part of how they're making their money in the U.S. And like you said, they're expanding everywhere. And, you know, you take one down, there's another one right down the street that's popping up, you know?
Yeah.
Let me ask for the initial first time you ran into to one of the grows. And so for one, the way you guys exited that situation, you know, thank God that you had the background and training on that. Cause
we were lucky too, man.
How quickly. What was the initial reaction when you went back and said, hey guys, you're not going to believe what we just found?
Well, it was the first one in 2004. I just had a lot of points to make and a lot of learning lessons that I wanted to convey to my supervisor. And it wasn't a statewide thing yet in 2004. It was about to be. We weren't really formalized where we were dedicating like officers of the camp program to be on helicopter teams. That would happen in 2005. And we would have 3 game wardens. One of them, that one of my closest brothers for life, was on a camp team when that shootout happened. In 2005, though, on August 5th, because that was the first time a Sinaloa cartel run grow had ended in an officer being shot and injured and or killed, right? Or he was so close. He hadn't died, thankfully, but that was the first time that had happened in the country, and it happened to be a game warden in the Silicon Valley of California. So the governor's office is getting a ton of calls like, what the heck is Fish and Game wardens doing in a drug raid? You almost got that kid killed. I mean, there was all this stuff going on. There was a lot of pushback. And our chief at the time, Nancy Foley, was just, you know, a rock star in how she handled and supported us. She said, no, man, there's environmental crimes up there. And, you know, my guys are tactically trained, and I'm very proud of what they did today. And we're horrified with the injuries to our officer. And we're standing by the minute as he goes through surgery and everything like that. But it got national attention. And there were SWAT teams from not only the Bay Area, but all over the West Coast, like on that mountain, because it happened on a Friday, and they still had growers outstanding. And we were in one part of one grow we thought was the grow. It turned out there were like 4 or 5 more grows on that whole mountain, dominating a mile of ridgeline for probably a decade, to a total of 23,000 plants, which at the time was a county record in Santa Clara County. So there were
crazy
San Jose Merge SWAT, there was DOJ SWAT, there were guys camped out in the hill where the gunfight happened, had to hold it as a crime scene overnight, hearing, you know, growers and gunmen leave the woods and kicking plastic irrigation buckets that they couldn't see, but they were close. And some of my partners that were on the camp program, like Marcos that I just mentioned, he was sitting in our grow site after we extracted and short hauled out after Mojo was helicoptered out on a basket line, a long line. And it was said it was a weird night. Said it was just like people, like a migration of bad guys leaving the forest, you know.
Yeah.
But it got a lot of attention. There was some pushback. But what I liked about the whole thing is it got some attention. Mm-hmm. You know, game wardens, wait a minute, there's environmental crime in cannabis grow sites. I mean, what, cartels? No, it's a hippie thing. Guys growing in the woods, right? The whole Cheech and Chong mentality of the hippie grows in Northern California and the Emerald Triangle, that kind of mindset, you know, from the 80s, that was starting to be a shift of awareness. And obviously in the Silicon Valley where it happened, everybody was starting to take heed to it, because for the overall low crime rates we have in the Silicon Valley and the tech capital of the world and the affluence there, and the pristineness around the city in those mountains everywhere, like I've talked about, where all this wildlife still is, it just didn't add up. And I think it shocked us to think, if the rest of the country can see that this happens in the Silicon Valley, then it can happen anywhere.
Yeah.
Right? It can happen anywhere. And it probably is. Didn't know at the time that the meth trade, later fentanyl, and all the human trafficking stuff were literally being run by the same group that ran that grow. Didn't know that, because they would morph as any company that grows and diversifies. They would diversify into other crimes that made them as much, if not more money, but just keep adding to the corporate success model, right? And they're very good at it. And you have to respect that. And you have to take it seriously, and you have to fight it as a priority. And thankfully, that, Reed, as we talked about before the show, we're starting to go that direction.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of why I asked that question. I was curious is, when you first bring up like, hey, we ran into a grow site. We saw, two, who knows what, sicarios, but at the time you're like, who knows what these guys are, some Spanish speaking. And, I'm just imagining the pushback from up top being like, what are we talking about here? And then, it progresses into, like you said, in 2005, they realize, oh shit, this isn't, because I wanted to ask this too. Was there ever any rumors of criminal, like, was there any like whispers, talks before you guys ever came across them? Or was this literally just out of nowhere?
Well, it was DOJ and the guys working narcotic trafficking. They were aware that it was Sinaloa backed, and they were aware they were embedded in the Silicon Valley. Excuse me. And we just weren't privy to it because game wardens weren't working those cases. But ironically, that 04 grow we did, that GI found and that we bird dogged and led the team on, almost pretty much close to a year, maybe a year and a couple months before the August 5th, 05 incident happened, that at least put me in front of the guys that were working it. And I had some resources now that I could ask, hey, what does this mean? What cartel's involved? How prevalent is it? How long has it been going on? Which was big. And then that day, of course, because we had an officer shot and almost killed, that led to a whole lot of help from DOJ of trying to backlog the shooter, get the intel, go to informants, and all those different things. And when we were on leave from that shooting investigation and we were doing hospital visits with Mojo, and I was preparing, wrote a paper actually on this at the request of my chief, Nancy Foley, that was basically a narrative story of the shootout. It would later become, it would be a modern, basically an edited version that's chapter 2 in the first book. She wanted it written for the whole department because we had never experienced anything like this. So at advanced officer training, which half the state goes to 1 year for 3 days and the other half switches off, she bound and published them through our department, handed everybody, got a copy to read, and then I spoke on the issue and the mistakes we made and what we learned and the environmental damage that was in there. So it wasn't only a big education lesson and a big shocking shift to our agency, it was to conservation agencies everywhere that were getting wind of it. And Nancy used to say a quote that I used the quote in Hidden War that I mean, 6 words, but so profound: change is inevitable, growth is optional. We were making a change whether we liked it or not. Were we going to grow into that change? Were we going to embrace that change? Were we going to be super effective at that change of going into fighting these cartels on the weed front with other agencies and eventually with our own team? That was yet to be determined. Because like I talk about, especially in Hidden War, the internal and external politics of game wardens making a focus on that, environmental component or not, didn't sit well with everybody because not everybody wants us to be doing that. If you're a traditional game warden from my mentors and they're going, you guys are doing what? Yeah. There's deer poachers to catch, man. There's guys spotlighting deer. And those guys are right. All those other crimes we're talking about are not less important. They didn't suddenly become secondary. I've made it clear on every podcast, those are just as important because there's so few game wardens and there's so much poaching we never get to see, right? That thin green line is tenuous unless you're on it now. We're having this conversation. You're part of our thin green line. Thank you. Joe Rogan said, I'm in the thin green line. I went, I'm freaking honored, Joe.
Oh, I'm going to get a shirt and everything too.
I'll send you some stuff.
Let's do it.
Yeah, I got you, man. I'm honored that you're part of it. And the thing with that whole situation is we had to grow or we were not going to be effective. I mean, if we're good at traditional anti-poaching things and we turn our eye to the environmental impacts and reclaiming and cleaning those grow sites up and trying to actually arrest these guys and put some deterrence on them, that they don't just go hide in their hidey hole, disappear, and then they come out of a spider hole a day after we leave or an hour after we leave, and they get picked up and they're in grow site number 7 or, at a meth cook somewhere in a forest or whatever. Then we're just spinning our wheels, and we're getting funded to play whack-a-mole.
Yeah.
So I didn't agree with that. And I knew it was going to be rebellious. I knew we couldn't have a team right away. We would have 4 more gunfights where we would come close to getting hurt, but we didn't get hurt, thankfully. Bad guys lost. We came out alive. And then we got canines. We were doing light runners, I talk about in the first and the second book, or those of us that were on marathon or relay teams, we'd be the light runners and run these guys down with rifle support if they were coming in close when we're doing the bad guy hunt. Definitely e-ticket, adrenaline rush, because it's super close contact in these grows with dense woods. Kind of my relatives that fought in Vietnam said, you guys are fighting a modern Vietnam jungle.
Yeah.
Like conflict, punji pits, that the VC would have all over the Ho Chi Minh Trail. We find punji pits from Sinaloa cartel growers in Whiskeytown National Park.
Punji pits.
In Shasta County on a main trail, tarp over it, leaf litter so it looks just like the trail. You pull back that tarp, and our point man, who is a Shasta County Sheriff's deputy and a sniper's, about to step on that tarp, thinking he's stepping on the trail. And Canine Phoebe, who passed away right before I retired, God rest her soul, our premier canine that we got to mention, she alerted because she was into detecting those scents and those items and the smell of whoever, either a poison or a grower. And he didn't step into it. And I'm on another grow down south, and this is like 2016, 2017. Our Met guys are spread out. We have our full-time team now. And Brian Boyd, Rumble in the book, sends me pictures. He goes, look what we just found, man, going into this grow site. I said, you're in Whiskeytown National Park today, bud. I read the ops plan, and it's a punji pit, and there's a color photo of it in the book. And instead of feces on the sharpened bamboo sticks, they're like oak sticks that are sharpened to a razor sharp point with the carbofuran poison.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's tossed the poison.
They put a nerve agent on it. So they were literally using guerrilla warfare tactics circa Vietnam in national parks in California, the cartels, to grow tainted weed. And that's what we're now up against. So we had to stay involved.
I mean, speaking of terrorism is labeling it, right there, eco-terrorism is its own factor, but just right there alone, I know you mentioned this, I think, on Julian's show, but God forbid someone just walks by that's just a citizen. They walk by, they're done.
Yep.
But even for any of you guys, that type of security that they're using, quote unquote, you hear about that, it's like, yeah, that's clearly a terrorist group if they're operating with that.
It absolutely is. It's intimidation, right? And we looked at, Julie and I pulled up the definition of terrorism. I said, let's pull it up, man. There's all this talk, with the election just happening, that what does it mean to list the cartels as terrorists? Are they, targeting civilian targets for political gain? Political gain, monetary gain, all comes into the same umbrella. There's big politics involved because we know we have corruption within our nation, shock to the system. We know we have, the Asian organized crime groups in Siskiyou County buying up property tied to trying to influence politics in that particular county to take it over. So yeah, there's no doubt that, this does, in my eyes, and I think most administrators' eyes, fit the definition of terrorism in America. Mm-hmm. And now the whole debate, and I know we're going to get to this at some point, but how far does that go?
Yeah.
How aggressive are we going to take our military forces? Let's say tier 1 operation groups like Delta, SEAL Team, DevGru. Let's look at forces like that. Hard, awesome, world's best fighting forces, select targets, military operators, National Guard or otherwise, mainline forces on the border right now, guarding the border, dealing with border security. Pros and cons to both. You got to look at it realistically. I think we can definitely say that the 6,000 military personnel that are adjuncting with Border Patrol Texas Rangers, the game wardens on the southern border of Texas. And game wardens are down there doing as much anti-cartel stuff as we've ever done embedded up north. They're just doing it on the border. You know, it may not even be an environmental component necessarily, but it could lead to it if they get across, right? The wrong guys do. But they're dealing with it on a public safety factor, you know, and it's definitely made a dent. But, you know, that's a good discussion to have amongst you and I here, just from the standpoint of we have a lot of Americans that live down in Baja. You know, I was part of a race team for 20 years on the Baja Peninsula, an orphanage I support down there with our race efforts. I don't go there anymore now for obvious reasons. Unfortunately, I can't be down there right now. But there's a lot of Americans that live in Mexico, right? And there's a lot of people that could be very, very vulnerable to being targeted depending on how much force we put at the border, or do we put force inside Mexico and take down cartel targets? New administrator, new president seems very, very supportive and open to, you know, some of the new administration's collective ideas to stop these cartel groups. And I definitely agree, you know, with where Trump's administration is at. This is not something we just want to wage ourselves. I mean, if we don't have the support to protect both of our countries and look at this as a unified front, because her country's under siege. You know, we're the victims of it. We haven't
And they're
embedded.
losing that siege.
And they're losing that siege. Yeah, you said it best. They're losing that siege. So it has to be done very carefully, very strategic, conscious that not only do we have Americans that are vulnerable down there, but we also have who knows how many embedded terrorists now in America.
That was going to be my question, is because when I had Bob Porras on, former Delta, and we were talking about special forces getting sent down there, he's like, yeah, if we send Delta down there, they're going to kick the shit out of whatever that target is, and, you know, it's going to go smooth. But, and as we're highlighting here, they're embedded all throughout the country, and not just, you know, the guy on the street corner passing on the drugs. You've legitimately engaged them multiple times, but even ones that maybe haven't been engaged but are just sitting out there, you know, Texas, New Jersey, Montana, North Dakota, like pick a state, whatever. If stuff gets really hot down south, his idea was that they're probably going to send the message up north and say, make it get hot up north, because because then all the attention has to go back there. So it's kind of that double-edged sword where it's like, how do we approach that? Because it seems like Trump is very locked in on, in some way, exploring operations south of the border, you know, within Mexico. So I guess, how do you see that? Would you say that that's definitely kind of a risk, or like what's the approach there?
Yeah, I think you hit it on the head, and he's right. There is going to be pushback. I mean, the second Trump took office, he made it perfectly clear we're going to target this, and appropriately, I'm glad he did, because I've been pushing this for 15 years now. Please make this a not so hidden war. All right, I can tell you from examples that'll get anybody on the political spectrum, left or right. Animal rights enthusiast, preservationist, I don't like animals dead for hunting and consumption, to conservationists that we love our wildlife, but we're hunters, we're anglers. I've never seen a more unified front, left and right, cannabis, anti, pro-cannabis, preservationist, conservationist. Everybody, when they see the pictures in the book, when I do a presentation, when I tell these stories, they're in tears, man. Because everybody likes wildlife. Everybody likes clean water. You don't even have to be in the woods to go to a park, you know, here in Dallas that some creek flows through, feed the fish, see the ducks walking
just
around.
An appreciation from
it's just,
it at the end of the
it's
day.
just a calming thing, you know. And through COVID, we saw that with everybody on lockdown with depression and suicide and alcohol and drug abuse, people started getting outdoors and they started feeling hope again. And the endorphins and the adrenaline kind of gave them some hope, you know. But he's 100% right. There's going to be pushback. And remember when I said at the start of our conversation, when I'm talking to Congress about this, that we're focusing on the border, but everybody here, please understand, it's not the border anymore. You can lock the border up, you know, with a skeleton key that only the president has, and have a force field 200 feet below ground, above ground, alien glass bubble where nobody's going to make it across that border without, like, you know, a plasma cannon or something.
Yeah.
And we have 22 million undocumented people that made it across. They've been here. It's been a 4-year agonizing hemorrhage, fast, slow bleed, whatever you want to call it. Now we have it in every state. So that's our priority. And thankfully, he's attacking that. He's going state by state and saying that we're finding them. We're going to locate people who don't fit the immigration definition. We're going to find the criminal groups, especially through that. And we're going to have to deal with that right now as a national priority, first and foremost, because we've got probably 10 years ahead of us for what's happened in the 4 years under the previous reign. And I do agree there will be some pushback. The latest figure that Tulsi Gabbard talked about, and in recent, or it was referenced from, it might have been Tulsi or it might have been one of the other security directors currently under the new administration just kicking butt. And it was at least 100 known terrorists made it across the border, right? They were at least checked, contacted, and only 8 were detained and deported or just sent back directly. 8. So that's what we know of. Those are the ones that were
I was going to say, yeah, and that's probably severe underestimation.
Yeah. So when you look at that, what does that tell us? That tells us that there's anybody that can be radicalized at a switch, and some target gets hit, Sinaloa's, trafficking hub, or one of their big, super meth labs, or Jalisco New Generations. It's a super violent cartel. Anything hits, who knows what targets start going for mass casualties in America. So I've said that with this war against the cartels to protect America, it's not just that military law enforcement presence and strategically hitting targets and eliminating the threat of the ones that are deadly and violent, but it's the diplomacy, working with our southern neighbor, working with our northern neighbor in Canada, because we have a lot of border infiltration from the north. Mm-hmm. I'm only 28 miles from the Alberta border and the most remote part left in America. And I know what my Border Patrol brothers are doing in my backyard. We talk, and I know what is happening on the southern border too. So we have the north to consider. And we have to educate, man. We have parents and kids. As scary and as wake-up call as that topic is, we have to talk about human trafficking. We have to talk about how kids are abducted. We have to talk about the warning signs. We have to talk about protocols if you see a stranger, a weird vehicle, how you stay in eyesight, what panic you have, what communication system you have, Fentanyl. If you ever get a dirty pill that you think is a sedate painkiller, you're not even experimenting with the drug to get high with your friends at a party. Where did that pill come from? Oh, it's one of my parents' pills. It looks like a normal blue opiate, that I was given for a knee recovery, for a sprain in high school sports, yet it came out of a dirty lab in Mexico, and it's a deadly pill. I saw a
kid that was like 14 that died thinking it was Adderall.
Yeah.
And they tell you it was just laced Adderall.
Yeah. And I have a friend, brother, in the Silicon Valley. Her niece was valedictorian of a very affluent high school up near Stanford. She was a volleyball player. She was a musician. She was a straight A student. She was going to an Ivy League school. She was a senior. And she got out of rehearsals, did volleyball practice, had some knee pain from doing her sport, took a pill that somebody had given her, went into her bedroom to do her homework. That was the last time her mom saw her alive, and woke her up because she hadn't got up with her alarm to go to school the next day and was dead in her bed. And that wasn't a relative of mine, but it was a relative of somebody that's very near and dear to me. And I'm one of the few people I know in law enforcement or law enforcement history that doesn't directly know someone that died from it, but I feel very close to that young lady as an example of, again, affluent Silicon Valley, not your cliche stereotype drug addict addicted to fentanyl or, shooting heroin, in an alley. It's everywhere. It's getting to everybody. So we need to educate our kids, not sugarcoat it. The antidotes, it's come up in other podcasts like the test kits they make. Well, the kids are going to take pills. Do you give them a test kit as a parent? Have them actually test it before they take a clandestine drug that you don't want them, All those are big issues. But it definitely has to be a community, all-encompassing thing. And I think we're going that direction. This war, there's a lot of positioning for those jobs and for that emphasis on education. And something I still do a lot of, and it's really cool to do this, is like middle and high school assembly groups come in and tell the Hidden War story. And I did it when I was operational as doing the outreach component as the team leader of the team. But now I like to just do it as retired. Here's what's happening, guys, across the country. I'm the last guy to come in here and tell you, don't try weed. It's so sedate in everybody's mind. It's regulated and legal in so many states, including California. I just want you to know what a majority of the black market weed that you might be getting your hands on involves. And then I show them the PowerPoint. I show them those pictures in Hidden War, the color ones. Like, they see in the bottles of poison. They're seeing the dead mountain lion. And I've had literally high school kid goes, you know what, man, I consume weed with my friends recreationally, and I can go to dispensaries now, and I know, all the dispensaries aren't necessarily clean. Some bad weed's getting into some of those, and I just don't even want to touch it anymore. It's not worth it to me. And I said, my point was not to tell you not to do it. My point was to give you all the facts so you make an educated decision on how you spend your recreational time. And that's how you get people, especially our next generation, our youth, high school age, and even a little younger, to make a choice.
It's definitely an unpopular opinion in this podcast space, but I am personally pretty against it, specifically for two reasons. And this is actually part of the conversation I wanted to have. I know Rogan has mentioned this a ton of times, but forget the guest he had on. But basically breaking down how marijuana acts as psychosis, and the more powerful it's gotten, it's, especially as kids are doing it younger, really messes with the way that their brain's formed, and it pushes things like schizophrenia and other real issues. But, twofold. One, now with legalization efforts, marijuana has gotten outrageously strong.
Right.
Outrageously strong.
Yep.
And then two, all these additional chemicals that are within these grow sites that is within the marijuana, because a lot of it was kind of, again, one of those second level effects, is that a lot of people, even though there is legal weed, they go to buy black market even more now because they got introduced to it. But it's so costly that the black market is even larger. Right. And, these weeds have all these, we were talking about the impact it has on the environment, but I can't even imagine what these chemicals, if you're smoking them, are doing to your body. Maybe it doesn't kill you directly.
Not right away, but it'll kill you.
But there has to be some detrimental impact, and things like, again, schizophrenia, whatever it might be, I'm sure are massive in terms of what it could actually do. For sure.
Yeah.
And then I guess with that, so I know it's not super popular in the space, but I think that the way I'm not against weed legalization. I just think there's we got to tone it down a bit, because seeing some of the stuff that these 1,000 milligrams THC and crazy strong.
Just crazy strong. Yeah.
That end up at that point it's LSD or something. And then again, this is obviously a focal point in the conversation, but undercutting that black market, because when you open the door, it's almost like when they banned alcohol and people were they had the taste, they had to get it, so they immediately went to the black market, and there's so many dangers there. But one of the things I wanted to kind of continue in, and you were highlighting it, is the creation of Task Force Met, and the Delta Sniper Team. So everything we laid out was obviously to build up to that, but when did the conversation start, and for the initiation of that task force?
Yeah, that's a good question. And it was all a matter of, especially in the state of California, under the political mindset at the time, timing and great leadership that thankfully believed in me and my co-founder, now chief of the department, Nathaniel Arnold, and the guys on the team, because it was not something I think would have ever happened with any of the administrators that have retired since my mentor, Mike Carrion. He trained me in the academy, groomed me to be an instructor, defensive tactics, firearms. I excelled at that early in my career, was a statewide instructor as part of our firearms committee for a certain district in the state that oversaw a lot of that stuff at a very young age. I was a baby on the committee and kind of jumping in, but what a blessing, what an honor to learn from these freaking just legends, Mike was watching what was happening. When Nancy was the chief right before Mike, she was the first to put officers into camp, which was fantastic. She was the first to continue to support us out there, provided we had the environmental component, provided we were doing reclamation and cleaning grow sites, that we weren't just out raiding, trying to catch bad guys and cutting plants. And that's really what she wanted to see our agency, and I wanted to see us pushing towards, was the environmental awareness, reclamate those grow sites, make it a deterrence for Sinaloa to come back at least to that site, protect one waterway, and just start doing the best you can. But the politics at the time to have a formalized team of some of your best game wardens, because everybody that's on the Met team or that was recruited in the early days when I got to handpick the guys for the pilot program that would later lead to the full-time team, they were 1%ers. I mean, these guys were highly awarded Wardens of the Year, absolutely kick-ass take-name game wardens on hardcore poachers, great at outreach, great at working with kids and hunter education. They exemplified what a game warden that you're going to be proud of, the best of the best. They just had great careers. And now you're going to leave patrol in a district. And keep in mind, we live in our districts. So we live and have our offices, our patrol trucks, our second computer, our second phone, our war room. Everything has to be at home because we literally are going to respond in the middle of the night to like a mountain lion depredation problem that some rancher's having on his front porch that's going after his pets or maybe just killed his calves, or we're going to have a poacher in the middle of the night doing something crazy. We're going to have a cartel gun shootout, which has happened. And next thing we know, we're going to something that we don't know is weed related. So your people, you become a member of the community. It's so different than a traditional law enforcement job where you check in, you grab your car, you go out for a shift, you do your great job as a policeman or sheriff's deputy, but you may not have quite as intimate connection with your community that you serve, where you become family, like me now with my ranchers. So much poaching stuff we handled, cartel grows, hunter trespass, people killing animals off of their ranches to sell them, for commercial wildlife sales, and now go to cattle brandings and now go to events and now mentor their kids that want to go into conservation, things like that. That's how intimate and how cool, what makes the thin green line of being a game warden so incredibly awesome. So with that, you're going to leave that job of being not only good at it, but your community knows you're the local game warden to call. They're real comfortable working with you. Your lieutenant can trust you. You're a mentor to all your new young game wardens. You're a field training officer because all of us were what we call FTOs, and we're training new people right out of the academy because you want to put your new trainees with FTOs that are go-getters and immerse those youngsters in everything they can possibly get in 4 weeks before they go on to the next trainer for a month and then a third and final trainer for a month and hopefully do well enough to make it out and be a solo game warden. When all that's going on, I had to pull, 10 to 12 people from that. So you can imagine the pushback. Supervisors just going, you guys are doing what?
Yeah.
And we had to have a meeting with our new chief when Mike got the job. And he said, okay, I know where this is going before we even dive in, because I had been talking to my chiefs from grow sites, like one near miss, almost a gunfight, chapter 2 of Hidden War, where 2 armed gunmen are walking out of a grow site like a stone's throw from where I'm at in Silicon Valley now, Uvis Canyon, beautiful little creek. And one guy, both have guns on him. One we can't see, one we can see. One guy's got the gun. He's starting to pull. Rumble sends Phoebe for the bite because we don't want to get in a gunfight. We want to get him down, get the gun out without any gunplay. And Phoebe bites a suspect that's got a gun, but then another guy pulls a gun out and is about to pull it on us. And he has to go hand to hand and says, John, take my dog. Fortunately, we've all been trained to deal with Phoebe on a bite because that's crazy.
Yeah.
Right. She's got a bad guy.
Mountain Walls don't play.
They don't play. But now you're going to go in and engage. So we're cross-trained. And that was the big thing when we formed up the marijuana enforcement team, canine heavy. And I had been making calls for years to my chiefs in real time during these missions when we didn't have a dog and we had a gunfight. And we survived, but it was super close. Or our light runners were going to run out and tackle a guy, and our riflemen covering us. And I was one of those light runners usually because some of us were on our department's relay team and various things. And we're about to engage, and all of a sudden somebody sees a gun slung low. Well, we're not going to chase that guy down with handguns and try to go hand to hand. And now all of a sudden we're aborting, he's pulling a gun, and we're in another gunfight. So we had a lot of close calls, man. Before
It's
Met,
a matter of time, too.
it was a matter
with anything.
It was just an attrition. Exactly, Reed. You said it best. It was a matter of time. And we were always just, it was
Yeah.
That was another close one. We really need a dog all the time. I wish I had this team all the time. And so he said, okay, you want a task force? I'll take the political brunt, handpick your guys. You'll have 3 months to test it. And we were going to, this was from about July 15th through September of 2013. And we had talked about it, the end of the year before that, and then really made it a real thing in 2013. And our chief was just awesome to handle the pushback, if you will. But now we had to prove ourselves, and we were letting partners down. We were leaving our supervisors that relied on us from patrol. We had a lot of negative ideas of what we were doing. It was just a natural thing because, again, change is inevitable, growth is optional. Very uncomfortable change. We were going into the unknown, but more importantly, the people we were leaving behind didn't like that change either. And who can blame them? Mm-hmm. Because again, we're not that many game wardens. We're already the thin green line. Now we're anorexic thin. We're like dental floss, man, because I just lost 12 out of,
and the best guys,
390 and some of the best, but we were 6 weeks into the pilot program in 2013, and myself and my captain, Nate, were on our way up to the mountains to visit all of our chiefs in their quarterly meeting, including the chief himself. And we're just saying, we need more money. We're running out of money, man. We worked 31 days straight in August with the military, with a PAFOC team for Operation Pristine. And we're documenting everything like never before. These numbers are mind blowing, and we've been really safe. Phoebe and another canine assigned to the team have saved lives. There hasn't been one shot of gunfire exchanged. This is a win-win. And we got there to start doing an overview, and he just said, we're done. We've been talking about cannabis and you guys for 2 hours before you got here, and it's working. Good job. You guys are tired. Keep going. We got you. But by January 1st of 2014, I want a full-time unit. You're going to leave patrol. You're going to work under the special operations umbrella vertically right down through headquarters, meaning Sacramento, not for district chiefs, district captains, district lieutenants. And we had to do all the testing in the fall, pretty much from September till December, come up with the testing, SWAT type training, scenario-based, verbal interview, tactical skills. We tested it all.
So you guys were training more with with SWAT, or were you guys getting like some tier 1 guys and stuff and getting tactics as well, or mix and match? Yeah, and a lot of us already had that. Mm-hmm. So like one of the guys I recruited was a 20-year SEAL team veteran that came over to us from DOJ after 9 years active and 11 years reserve. Frog, as he's called in the book, who's now actually the chief of the whole cannabis program. And yeah, perfect. Great guy. And close to, moving on to phase 2 himself. And I'm excited for that for him. But recruited him with his operational experience, and he was 9 years as a sniper, plus in the teams that way. And he was leading units, which was fantastic. Myself and Marcos that were in Santa Clara County, we had since 9/11 even on the down low, we were like going to sniper schools that the sheriffs would let us into, or tier 1 units would let us into the Bay Area. We, have to buy and build our own sniper rifles, beg and borrow match ammo, and do it on our own time. But then we'd go there and they're like, game wardens are in sniper school? Who are these clowns? He's a kicking ass too.
And then we'd get on gun, we'd do our job, we'd shoot really, really proficiently, and we just try to outwork everybody and out-help anybody. And pretty soon we made a lot of friends, a lot of friends with tier 1 SWAT units, and it was really, that was humbling. That was really, I really was grateful for that. Knowing that we were building the building blocks to be capable of having a team at the highest level when the time was right. And at the time when we were doing that training, Reed, and this was right after 9/11, like 2002, and it was SWAT school, tactical tactical tracking, survival school, where you're going after armed fugitives, SWAT, pistol, carbine, you name it, submachine gun, basic and advanced sniper schools. I had been a trained sniper now and certified, but now I was graciously roped into a training cadre to help teach basic and advanced sniper schools right in the Silicon Valley through the sheriff's office. And we were one of the first advanced schools that shot past 300 yards for a domestic law enforcement SWAT sniper unit. And we were having everybody come. We were having Army snipers, Marine Corps guys were coming, They were doing law enforcement now. They'd go as a refresher. We had SWAT guys come. We had every level. And we were more than equipped and had more than enough of the 12 people that were on that team. I'd say 8 to 10 of them already had every certification in the book to be an operator at that level. We just didn't have a formalized team. Rumble and Phoebe were already that canine super team with Shasta County Sheriffs. Myself and Marcos, when he come help, were embedded with Santa Clara County as a mainstay on the team, not only for SWAT tactics, but primarily for marijuana, which was most of the SWAT guys and snipers ran the Met team, naturally so. Fresno, Central California, Frog, Nate, all those guys were starting to immerse and build training programs out there. So we just had to get everybody consolidated. We had to get it to be a real thing. And once we did that, and once we didn't have any red tape, we didn't have to do routine patrol stuff, we didn't have to do any type of time sucks from other areas, very important areas, but we had to let that ball go to somebody else. The gloves were off, and it was incredible.
So we're going to jump into that here in a sec in terms of, I guess that January timeline and where we went from there. But in terms of the operational training that you guys are doing and kind of planning and, to the level that you can speak to this.
Sure.
What were, as people are training up, like how were you guys strategizing? Because again, it's such a dynamic blend of a mix and match of SWAT and, what a lot of these tier 1 guys, the way that they're operating, a number of the guys that I've talked about the GWAT, they said that in the early 2000s in the initial phase, not that we were getting our ass kicked, but we were having a tough time because all of our preconceived notions are from Vietnam.
Right.
And so we had to completely reframe the way that we were operating over there. I imagine it's very similar where you guys are now doing operations in a very unique environment against a very unique enemy. So what did that strategic planning look like to the level that you can kind of highlight it?
Yeah, no, it's a cool question because it gets into your effectiveness or not is how you're structured. And Met was going to be a very unique team. And then Delta team that I was greenlit to develop, 5 of us went to snipers within Met. Delta was under that same umbrella, if you will, and that same mindset. And when we developed Met, we knew we needed to be primarily a rural, deep woods, small unit, effective apprehension, eradication, and reclamation team. However, we're everywhere in the state. And one thing about the state of California is you can go to 14,000 foot Mount Whitney where you're oxygen deprived, right? You can be literally, we've had grows on the coast in the sand, just right off the beach. We have the deserts of Southern California that are hot and arid and 29 palms. You think of training sites for desert training before you go to the GWAT. And then we have the Redwood Superforest, the Sierra Nevada, and then we have urban environments. So all these Met guys have all this SWAT training, can do indoor urban stuff too. Snipers can do overwatch and provide cover and make observations well before we hit a house, because a lot of these things lead to search warrants, stash houses, what might be in that house, what it leads back to, a grower or a hub. And then other things, just assisting on more egregious poaching violations that we have to hit a house on a search warrant. But because those particular suspects that weren't cartel and they weren't doing weed or anything like that, they're doing some other wildlife crimes, maybe trafficking in sturgeon roe, the eggs for money, abalone, black bear gallbladder parts, any of those things. But they have a felony record and they're known to be very aggressive with weapons. When that all happens and they go really high on the threat matrix, we would come in and help secure that in an urban environment. So we had to do everything. So we had to form the team to be adaptable, to do everything and anything and be lightly equipped, because especially if we were deploying the woods. And one mission, I talk about it in Hidden War, in Humboldt County, we had a illegal grower on private land that had actually shot at one of our game wardens in a vehicle stop, not injured our game warden, fortunately, and now is a fugitive for shooting at a cop on the North Coast. And there was a manhunt for him. And now we know roughly where he might be. And when I talk about Delta Team, there's one chapter dedicated to our sniper unit, which was just an amazing process to, one, form up within the unit, but to see it grow. We were deployed it was 3 to 5 days without water, without supplies, on snipers, on gun, doing observations, cross canyon, watching this guy, possibly trying to identify him, coming and going to finally get him safely into custody and take down whatever nefarious operation he was part of. So our sniper team had to be able to do that. Our Met team had to be able to do that. And as game wardens, we camp out a lot, so it was a natural fit. But you can't run a super huge sniper platform, shoulder fired gun, a rifle that's going to weigh 20 something pounds. You can't have a kit that's going to weigh 60 or 80 pounds if you're going to be that mobile and you're going to stay out that long. So we were unique,
No, you guys are one of the most fascinating special operations units I've heard, because just from the, I had plenty of Delta guys on and Navy SEAL guys. And it's interesting when you look at SEALs, it's like they're very constructed to work as a team, while Delta's supposed to be more kind of the solo operator. Like they're able to operate. The
mindset.
Yeah. And
true.
It's like an independence. You guys are a blend of both of those, where it's kind of like, what you're highlighting here. If you guys are on a hunt for someone in the forest, you kind of got to be able to live off the land, that type of, light, quick movement versus, same day, flip of a switch, you guys are operating like close-knit team too. I mean, that's just fascinating and all the different types of individuals you guys are working around too. That's why I was just so interested to hear that, because it's such a unique blend.
And that was the thing, you hit it on the head. And one of the things I'm so grateful to our military tier 1 special operation groups, obviously having Frog from the SEAL teams, knowing guys on Team 6 that I got to know, especially after retirement, and comparing notes. MARSOC Marines, we trained with in snipers, having Apache from the Sheriff's Department that was a heck of a Marine and knew many of the MARSOC Raider guys younger than him that he was kind of mentoring. So we had the input, and we had what I consider, the wealth of knowledge, the plethora of knowledge base from our finest force guys that had either were operational and on reserves and going back and forth. I mean, we worked with 3rd and 7th Special Forces a ton, that they were literally coming from Afghanistan and then back here for a year, and they would jump on counter drug, and they couldn't lead operations, but they were going on grows with us. And I made friends in 3rd and 7th SF groups to this day, and they taught me a bunch, and we still keep in touch on, man, what a crazy thing it was to do this mission and how we had to adapt to this versus what I would do over in the sandbox. So a very unique team from the standpoint of capability, and they have continued to grow, continued to evolve, and they've gotten even better. I mean, they've gotten exponentially better in so many ways since I retired, because one thing that team is continually supported to do, there's 100 or more wardens out of our 450 to 500 approximately wardens in California. 100 are assigned to the Cannabis Enforcement Program, CEP. They work only cannabis enforcement. Most of those are private land teams that go in on the private land grows, like in Siskiyou County. Mm-hmm. Med is still the tactical unit. They're the elite doing what they do and trained, in multiple disciplines. Snipers has evolved a little bit, the canines, drones. I mean, the different things that we're doing. But at the time we had to have a green light and we had to have kind of a blank slate. And so when I got the green light to build it with my captain and pick the guys, first thing I did was, pick Frog's brain on some things. He had a lot of great ideas, being an outdoor enthusiast and a hunter, all his time on the teams, but he was a game warden now. What better combination than a SEAL team veteran that was a trainer as a SEAL team and a sniper, but now he's a game warden doing that stuff. And he's like, when I gave him the call and said, hey, we're forming this team, I got the green light. He goes, you serious? He said, dude, I never thought I'd carry a rifle like that again, but I'm going to do it. and it was a leap of faith. All these guys had a leap of faith in us to say, I'll go try it, but I don't know what's going to happen here because I don't know how the department's going to receive this thing after 3 months. Am I going to burn a bridge, in my squad? So they all had to believe in the program, and they had to go in,
trust the mission,
dive into the deep end. And all the guys on the team were by far the most, not only were they 1% highly skilled at everything and amazing operators, but humble, selfless, the dream team you dream of when you talk to your Delta guys, or you talk to anybody in SF, or you talk to anybody in SEALs, or Marines, or any of our special operator groups. You pretty much check the ego at the door. And you don't have to, criticize somebody for a mistake because most people criticize themselves. I still beat up myself beyond the need to this day. But what we always said is, and my Trailblazer insignia that's on the shirt is the Delta Triangle. And the reason we named the sniper team Delta is when we did the research, Delta is based firmly in the ground, right? But also the Delta symbol stands for multiple ideas, bringing everything in, and assessing it. And definitely the reference in being close to the earth and us being earth warriors, as our legal cannabis growers call us, it's awesome.
Becomes the strongest shape too. Triangle.
What's that?
So triangle is the strongest shape possible too.
Strongest shape possible, man. And you get, in all corners. And the other thing we use the Delta Triangle for is the 3 prongs of the mission: arrest, eradication, reclamation. Because reclamation was missing from the component of grow site work, when really it's one thing to arrest a bad cartel guy that might get deported if he's a deportable felon. Maybe he's going to do some time. Hopefully he is. Hopefully he goes away for a long time. 9 times out of 10, he's going to get out. His boss is going to get him across the border somehow, some way. $4,000 to $7,000 at the time is all it was going to cost them. And he'll be in a grow site. But if we don't take that environmental destruction out, and that water stays polluted and people are drinking that, or animals are dying, or those chemicals are all over that for animals, that's why reclamation was so important. And we started to get our sheriffs, we started to get our DOJ, DEA guys on grows with us. And 3rd and 7th Special, and some SWAT teams would be like, okay, we're going to hold perimeter, man. We'll cut plants, but we're not going to be garbage collectors. And I said, I have 2 Green Berets right here loading up trash bags for the helicopter, man. Do you want to tell them that's not good work? You're going to tell them that they're just trash collectors? Yeah, good point. I got a couple more hours. Give me a roll of duct tape. I'm like, come on, man. I mean, I had more support on the reclamation side from my SF brothers in the military, and when you start to love your wildlands and feel like you're making a real dent, man, it's exhausting. You've been up for 15 hours already. You've had the adrenaline dumps and ups and downs, stalking bad guys. Maybe you went in with MVGs in the middle of the night. Maybe you had a canine bite. Maybe you had a long pursuit. Then you've eradicated multiple thousands of plants if they're not too toxically contaminated, and that stuff's at least dry so we can handle it with nitrile gloves and face protection. And now you got to collect all that crap and bundle it up for a helicopter to grab maybe that day or maybe later in bags. But you look at the site, you love the earth for all the right reasons, and you're making a difference. You find the energy. And our military component guys had that background. I put a bunch of them through hunter safety courses and they all became hunters after that. If they weren't already, it was really cool. So it was a unifying thing. And when I talked about the whole country getting behind this hidden war issue and being unified and completely non-political, this is what has kept that. I mean, look at the divisiveness, man, we've had through the last election, through the last 4 years, even now, and just the divisiveness where you will kick the most beautiful thing to the curb just because the other side is doing it. I mean, we saw that, right, in Trump's address to Congress and the children, the child, and then, the woman that was basically bashed apart, and you saw a lack of support. Without disparaging anybody, it's like, what human condition win do you not at least acknowledge? And that's what happens when you get that politically connected. And that's why I try to stay out of that as much as possible and just appeal to everybody's sensibilities of the earth is still very sensitive. Where it's being destroyed daily. There's so many bodies on this planet. We're not going to stop that from happening, but we can slow it down. We can make some good inroads, and especially in our backyard. And having military assets and allied agencies, never had a better challenge and a better reward of building teams from so many different areas to fight a domestic war that everybody can get behind. I mean, would have never anticipated in 1992 when I got into the academy that would be the last, 15 years. And the last 6 of running that unit they were light speed. We did not stop. We didn't take a breath from 2013 when we started. And I remember my retirement camp out with snipers and the whole team coming in later that night and out at the area where we sniper train and met train. And I'm like, okay, that was 6 years. Damn.
Blink of an eye.
Just like that. So God bless them for still doing the work out there, because they're risking their lives every day. And I can't thank them enough. And teams all over the country, because in the last 7 years since I've been, operationally retired, it's been a lot of other states experiencing it, and training and speaking to gang conferences and units starting to build teams similar to us with the resources they do have. And many game warden groups, conservation agencies, they don't have the resources California has, or Texas or Florida. They might have 60 game wardens statewide. And now this problem's in their refuges.
Or the access to training, equipment, like everything.
Exactly. But there have been big inroads with the progressive agencies. I talked about Texas before. Texas is very progressive because they're doing everything. Florida is very progressive. California is now, by all means. There are some other states that are doing it too. But that was the fun of the challenge.
Can you walk us through some of the early operations that you guys saw, and kind of how it really started to differentiate itself as its own task force, unique unit, and more specialized or better equipped kind of than some of those initial engagements that we had earlier gone through?
Yeah, it's another really great question. And every time we had an injury, and the one being in 2005, on August 5th, 2005, I often say that that's a day that, I'll never forget. Every year when that day hits, it's kind of a solemn day, a reflective day. I usually find myself not around a lot of other people. I find myself in the woods somewhere. If I happen to be in California, most likely Montana that time of year, you just, it's just, I'll never forget every minute, every second, how visceral that incident was, because it was the first time I had been in a gunfight. More importantly, it was the first time we'd ever had somebody hurt, happened to be my young partner. And the helplessness of knowing that if he doesn't get rescued soon, there's nothing more we can do. He's going to die of blood loss, go into shock, and he was starting to show those signs, but it's just his tough grit and will kept him alive.
He's a hell of a warrior.
He is a hell of a warrior, man, and amazing. And I just, one of my heroes for sure. And my sheriff's partners too, that had only worked with him for that day for the first time, were just amazed by him. And they felt as shattered and potentially helpless if we didn't get some help. And by the good graces and prodding and pushing and calling dispatchers to tell them what we really needed, and telling them, it's clear here. It's safe to come in. I mean, we had part of our hill secured, and the rest of that hill wasn't secured, and a lot of airships won't come into a hot zone at all. And we said, it's as clear as it's going to get. It's secure. And a CAL FIRE Huey pilot that decided, his battalion chief decided to buck the system and say, we're not letting that kid sit out there any longer. Send the bird in. So everything from air assets of who you work with, the military, we hadn't worked with PAFOC teams ourselves yet. And all the counter drug guys and the Air Force said, hey, if you're doing a mission, we'll spool up a Black Hawk. We'll have a prep team ready. We're 30 minutes max to getting anywhere you're going to operate. Max. That's as long as it's going to take us, if that. Highway patrol, we found a couple of different resources that we could count on. So our air support got exponentially better as the missions developed and we got greenlit. That was happening before we had our full-time team. But if we were working with the sheriffs, everybody learned from that incident because there were so many things we just hadn't experienced. You can't take a life flight helicopter that's an ambulance with a blade and land it in a jungle-like canopy. You're going to have to long lines people in and out. We're going to have to short haul in, stabo in as we call it, or out. All those were learning lessons. When we came together, we had already trained in April, the year of the pilot program, just to kind of formalize things that we'd already been doing. And we formalized it with that same sheriff's department. So Sergeant John Spagnola, who's my brother in arms, he's retired now, and John was actually a basic sniper school student in 2001 with me and Marcos. We were all students together in his own agency, and he would later lead that sniper team, later lead Sierra team. And he and I would develop the revised basic and advanced sniper school curriculum. But we were students together. It went back that far. So he brought the full asset of the Santa Clara County Sheriff's Office, their tier 1 firing range and training center that the Best of the West national SWAT competition used to be held at, and said, okay, you guys are going to do training. We'll train with you, set up the grow site scenarios, sniper pad, whatever. And so we were working with them as we developed our team. So we were right out of the gate doing missions without thinking about it. But you had to strategize how many missions we could pull off in a week safely without running ourselves into the ground, without pulling, my guys from the very northern tip of California down to, say, Southern California, and then back to Central California. And of course, a team of that level, you're training throughout the month. Snipers have to train independently of entry. Canines are training, independently of entry assault. But we all have to work together, and we're all essentially MET team members that can do the assault job. We can't all handle a canine directly, but if we have to, because our canine handler goes down, we will be able to handle that dog. We will be trained in bringing that dog off of a bite, caring for that dog. Tactical medicine. Tactical medicine had to be a complete advancement from what we didn't have in 2005. So as much as tactical units get the technology and they get the firearms training and, the best mousetrap for a carbine and the best night vision and the best optic and, excuse me, things like that, our trauma medicine had to be like massively improved. And now it's 2013. A lot's happened in the GWAT. A lot's happened with trauma protocol. A lot's happened with anticoagulants. And now it's dirty tourniquets. It's sucking chest wounds. It's leg breaks. It's doing trauma medicine to canines that might be stabbed or shot, because they honestly were in more danger than we were when we were running them every day. Canine Phoebe, Reed, a female Belgian Malinois in California that had 116 apprehension bites on cartel gunmen, had another almost 900 arrests where she didn't have to bite, guys that either gave up, right, or they just said, I have heard the dog. Stranded hikers, found murder weapons, lost children. But when I told Mike Ritland that story, when we got to know each other right after I retired, he goes, whoa, what? You have a Belgian Mal in California. How can you even have a team like this in California? How does a dog get that many bites? He goes, I have Team 6 guys that have had dogs for a career that don't have that many bites, on Taliban. I go, Mike, she was 3 years, she was 3 years of a hot mess, man. And it was her handler who's a 1 in a million and she's a 1 in a million dog. And they had to kind of, learn by growing pains, because they're not your traditional sheriff's rural dog, because they're going into these hot backcountry, super jungle-like, 8-10 miles sometimes as far into the backcountry. And yet she has to be an urban dog too, like a police dog. And at that point, it was like, okay, when you're on the show, we got to talk about this. And it was just a great thing, because there's a SEAL canine expert, right? Yeah. Mike's a great guy, great friend, and what he's done with Tricos and Team Dog is just fantastic. But
I need to get him on the show to train my dog, because my dog's an idiot. You get to meet him today. I'll bring him after.
Yeah,
I would have asked him.
Mike, if you're listening, brother, come on. Reed's awesome. Yeah, if you can get, and you're not, and you guys are both Texas guys, so that's pretty cool. But that was a game changer, is having dogs like that, dogs that were so dedicated and knowing how to work our tactics around the dogs. What was unique to us that isn't always necessarily the situation when you have a canine handler that's coming and going and they're not with your unit all the time, is, do you have enough trust in the dog and the dog handler? And can the dog handler and the dog trust the fellow operational crew? We did everything around the dog. So our primary thing was, you got to do things around the dog. The dog has to be in a position where she can detect, or he can detect and apprehend, but still have protection around it. Because 2017, 2018, toward the middle of my MET tenure, as I was getting close to retirement, we had 3 or 4 federal dogs that had been targeted, stabbed, some fatally, that did not survive. And the cartels were getting so savvy to the fact that these dogs were coming in and just wrecking their operations. Not only were they taking out their growers, not fatally, but they were injured and they were hurt. You're going to feel the pain from a dog bite. You're not going to die, but you're going to be out of commission for a while. More importantly to the cartels is, I just lost 30, 40 million on that super grow. And, some of my tier 1 grower, gunmen, whatever, they may not be the same after that dog bite, or they're going to be impaired for a while. And so they started to develop tactics where they'd basically suck the dog in. They'd have a firearm that we might see, but they'd have a fixed blade knife or a sharpened like deer bone to be like almost like an ice pick, and then taped up for a handle, almost like a prison shank. We've seen all kinds of different versions, but they would basically take the dog bite and then pull that fixed blade and go right for the jugular. And, you know, they took out some dogs. And I've got a picture of one of our federal dogs that is just out of surgery with all those stitches. And that canine is now retired. I'm not sure if, I think Canine Ice is still alive, but he's retired. He ran side by side with Phoebe in the heyday, you know, kind of mini me. It was great. But working apprehension tactics around the dog, working in very small units where the trails are real tight. Vietnam guys that did anything behind lines, MARSOC, any of that, MACV, you know, some of those groups. You hear the stories, they're starting to come out. Some of the operating environments we worked were a lot like that. It was 4 of us and a dog, and running as quiet and silent, making a very small presence, and then having obviously having support forces without going into too much detail, available. I can say that, but it's just small unit tactics in very noisy environments, going against an enemy that basically knows every inch of the ground they've lived on for 3 to the last 7 months, maybe for the last 7 years if it hasn't been detected. So they know what's out of sync. They know what sound. They know how sound carries off the ridge if an animal breaks a branch or a person breaks a branch. It's not easy, but that also makes the hunt that much more rewarding when you actually catch those guys and creep right up on them and you take them, without having to go to gunfire.
Were you guys relying a lot on pre-given intel? Like, were you guys trying a lot of these different, let's say, grow sites, again, to all levels you can speak, but were you guys doing a lot of information gathering and understanding, or was it more like as the operation's ongoing, you guys are obviously scoping out the situation beforehand, just like with any, but was it a lot more, similar to maybe what we'll see if one of the teams are going to go hit a house, like they're doing
workups
tons beforehand? Yeah. Are you guys doing a similar thing and then strategizing how you're going to approach?
Yeah, it went from just jumping in and assisting the sheriff's office with the recon they'd done and going into, we have a scout mission before we do a raid. We don't go into anything cold. A scout mission, isn't going to be a ton of people, but it's going to be a group. Usually whoever's responsible for a particular area, because we're all spread out throughout the state, and whoever's responsible, say, for the Silicon Valley is going to work with the sheriff's office if they're still doing that, or Santa Cruz, or, somewhere, Monterey County, you never know, somewhere in that general area of the Central Coast, and scout it, recon it, verify that it's there, learn the trails as safe as possible, get all the topo maps. I mean, a lot changed from 04, 05 to now with Google Earth and, military level Google Earth imprints, drones and everything. Yeah. So we have really, really good recon on what we're doing. And you're always going to have an X factor, unlike hitting a house where you know where all the entries are, where the hard targets are, the fortified positions. And 9 times out of 10, you can get a floor plan of a house you're working. So you don't know exactly what you're going to see inside, but you know where most doors and rooms are going to be. You know where that stairwell is. You know where hardcover might be, things like that. You're always going to have that X factor in the woods, because until you get right into the grow and you're under a canopy, you don't know how they're going to have laid out their complex. But I can tell you, our mission's fill and flow. I'm sure you've heard the military term, improvise, overcome, and adapt. And for us, it was fill and flow. And it was kind of like, don't fight an obstacle. Don't get frustrated. Don't expend energy. If that tree is in the way, then move the team to where they have better positioning for overwatch, get the guns in better sight for fields of fire, get the snipers where they can see the most. Like a river. We're a woods team, right? We're protecting waterways. Fill and flow, man. Just if something happens to this one guy, peel, one more gets into the stack, and we fill and flow through rooms in an indoor setting. But in the woods, it's always, I think, the most challenging.
I mean,
and honestly,
doubt.
for a woods team, it's what we enjoy the most. You know, I would rather be in a labyrinth of a complex with my Met brothers and Delta brothers than, you know, hitting a house with people I haven't worked with, that I haven't seen the workup for, that I'm assisting on. You know, it's just one of those things. Do it and still put everything into it and do it safely and do it effectively. But we thrive in the woods. You know?
I mean, well, you highlighted earlier that natural connection you have after spending so much time in the woods. You build something like that with teamwork, as well as, like, you know, that guy knows every movement of yours.
Yep.
It has your back no matter what, you know, and if you're looking left, he's looking right, versus if you have somebody that's even a click off just a little bit, you know, that can change the whole dynamic of the team and how the operations go too. So
yeah, you're hitting it on the head right there. It's one of those things where you just get intuitive to know your brothers. And it's where we have a hand signal system, you know, good communications where you can just whisper and hear each other. But 9 times out of 10, it doesn't come to that unless we're doing a wrap up, we're mopping up something. I'm, you know, directing folks to go certain places because we're containing a scene. I can just tell from seeing what my canine handler is doing with his dog and alerting and having a real good point man that just feels that tension from like a bump. They don't even make eye contact. And whoever's on point, carbine down range, good conceal, hopefully a cover position, but at least great concealment. And then you're going to kind of own that. You're going to own that corner. You're going to own that canyon. So it's cool.
So did the cartels, after you guys started hitting them much harder with a lot more organization, did you notice that they started shifting tactics, whether that was the number of individuals they had on grow sites, how grow sites were structured, like all these different things? Were they constantly evolving as well? And, you know, they
were. And again, not a dumb adversary, smart, clever, resourceful, tough, resilient, because these guys then were living out there 24/7. I mean, for months, half a year or longer, and very few cycle of rotation replacements, and tending the grow, defending the grow, camouflaging the grow, staying virtually silent. I mean, sounds of just two guys talking softly, if the wind is right in the middle of a canyon, can carry miles. It's madness how much sound carries when you're really in quiet space.
Scent too.
Yeah, right. Yeah, for sure. Compared to like an urban setting where you take it for granted and you're so convoluted with it, right? But what they started to do is they started to not do live-in grows. They started to do satellite grows where instead of putting 7,000 to 10,000 plants on one mountainside, putting a kitchen, putting a sleeping area, having multiple drying sheds, maybe some observation points for security, bug out spots, retreat areas, you know, secondary escape routes, things like that. Same thing we would do in tactics. They would do their version. They would be better at it because they have their route planned and they've been practicing for like 6 months. We're coming in for the first time quiet, officially making a raid after a lot of intel recon, but we haven't hit the ground. We're not familiar with that country, so we have to fill and flow. But they started to take, say, 10,000 plants in one grow and make it 8 1,200 plant grows and have like a little micro camp in each one. And they'd go in for maybe the middle of the night and get through the morning, being really quiet and stealthy, tend their plants, trim their plants, water their plants, maybe stay a night, but maybe bug out. And then go to the other site the next day and maybe mix it up. And if they do stay the night, they stay the night on a Tuesday, and then they stay the night on a Thursday, and you start working at midweek, and all of a sudden they switch it up and it's like, oh, it's Sunday. You know, what is going on? So a lot harder, knowing you're going to take a lot of resources to sit on a grow site that is smaller now. And it's only one of like 5 that these guys are running, because the other day they're in grow site 1,200 plants, you know, a quarter mile or half a mile away, let's say, or maybe further. They started to do a lot of that. Trail cameras too. We'd find them putting trail cameras out. That's kind of the new wave of everybody, for security, for wilderness hunting, tracking animals, you name it. I use a ton of them myself, even post-retirement. They're great, but they're also, you know, stressful because you can camouflage them really well if you know what you're doing. And they come in when you're not, and they're like, ooh, that's a weird boot and camo pattern. That's Policia, right? So yeah, they've changed. And then the big shift now is indoor grows, private land, because we regulated.
Really?
When we downgraded to misdemeanor under regulation, they don't have to hide. They can go into, a visqueen hoop house, the white plastic, and get as many as 5,000 plants in one of those big hoop houses in a little rural country track in the woods, but you can drive to it. And because there's so many of them now and it's a misdemeanor and there's not going to be that much of a penalty and there's no deterrence, the guys are like, okay, well, we'll see them coming. We'll run. They'll take our plants. They'll trash our stuff. But business as usual. I'll go to my 10 other grows. It's not that big of a deal. It's a misdemeanor. So I'm just going to take my chance. And I know they're going to hit, like Siskiyou County, they're going to hit 4 to 6 search warrants on this Friday, but there's 10,000 grows in this county. They may never get to me in 10 years, or they might get 4 of my grows next week. Cost of doing business, right? It's a business expense. So there still are on the national parks. They still are in, the tracts of public lands, far less though. That's the one good thing, I guess, the one positive of how we've regulated so poorly. I hate to even call it a positive because I like two negatives shouldn't make a positive, but they are moving out of public land, thankfully, not entirely, but a lot, and hitting the private land tracts. And other states that have followed our regulation structure to make it a misdemeanor, to make it really agreeable to legislatures to start getting that permit money and tax money, seed to sale, and everything that these growers have to pay now, California being an example. And that's why California Tier 1 growers, the people that should be growing our regulated marijuana, our cannabis, that do a good job, that have it DEM certified so it's not got any inorganics on it, seed to sale, it's a pure product, it's structured really carefully by strain. If you're going to regulate, that's what you regulate into the market. And unfortunately, those people are leaving the business because the overhead of their permits, the taxes they pay, they can't even break even because that marijuana is losing value. But the cartel cannabises from Chinese and Mexican cartels, it's 27% THC. It's potent. It's good. It's toxic, but it's good weed.
And if you want it, it's only that you can afford.
Yeah. And you know what? And people are buying it without even knowing they're buying that. Mm-hmm. They can package it. They can slip it in places. So that's been a shift too. And we talked a little bit about regulation before, and I structured this, and this came out. My very first studio podcast was Mike Ritland in Cooper, Texas, before he moved to his studio here in Dallas. Just a couple months after the book was published, and we talked about it. And he said, "What do you think is the solution?" And I said, I've seen so much of it. It's so raw and real. I don't know what structure or regulation is going to work best, but we both agreed. Like Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, how we regulate tobacco, how we regulate the wine and alcohol industry, cannabis under an umbrella like that for a federal standard, affordable, tracked, I think would be a really good solution. It wouldn't eliminate it, but it would eliminate most of it. It would, especially because the cartels are so lucrative in other places now, fentanyl, human trafficking, super meth, things like that.
Yeah. I mean, for them, if they lose the business here, they'll go the next direction for the cartel. One of the things, I guess, since we're on regulation or kind of just government oversight, we're highlighting this. I know you talked about it a little bit on Julian's show, but how the California government was putting some hurdles up in terms of how you guys could communicate with to the federal level. Can you speak to that a little bit as well? Because again, this goes to this politicization that we were talking about, where this is such a giant issue that we need to kick politics out of it and actually look for solutions.
You really have to, because cannabis having such an environmental component of being done correctly and being done in environmental areas where there's no harm, no damage. And I'm going to talk about some of the legitimate growers in California, in Northern California, that I've interviewed and gotten to know, that love our team, term us the Earth Warriors, and literally in an outdoor grow site, I'm not kidding you on this, Reed, in 110 degree heat, they're down to using less than 1.5 gallons of water per plant per day, because underground on their outdoor grow, they've buried like oak logs and branches, and they've created sponges and aquifers underground that absorb so much water and sustain that water where it doesn't dry up, that actually through the drought, they were conserving more water than pretty much anybody in agriculture for cannabis. And
that's incredible.
Keeping animals off, no pesticides, fenced properly. Grow site that we did some documentary footage with, that was their last year, multi-million-dollar. They couldn't sustain because of the regulation structure, all the permit costs, distributors that weren't paying them, corruption within the regulated system. Yet the regulated system being promoted at the state government level because of all the money it's going to generate, and seeing the dollar signs. And the money and the political side of the money involved is what is absolutely destroying our environment and incentivizing the cartels. Because when we watered it down to a misdemeanor and greenlit these guys to put an illicit market, what did we do? We skyrocketed the amount of cartel business, private land and public land, right? And we started to deter legitimate regulated growers that would do it environmentally sound, and actually put a good twist on those of you that want to be part of the cannabis industry. And now they're leaving the business. So, and then when we know that the majority of this boost in cartel activity are from deportable felons, they're here illegally, whether they're Chinese, Hmong, or Sinaloa cartel members, as an example. And now we're going to go after them, and there's no penalty. So what have we just done? We've incentivized them to be here. They're not scared of anybody.
Yeah, they'll just come right back. Too.
Right. However, at the federal level, they're still a deportable felon. So if I just call an ICE agent as the Met team leader, that by policy I'm actually co-branded as a federal agent under U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Hey man, we have somebody from Sinaloa. He's definitely a known cartel member, and he's not supposed to be here, and he's definitely not a U.S. citizen. That should be my mandate. And federally, I think it's a no-brainer, and the state should cooperate. But when we're getting orders to not share information on a gunfight suspect that we had to engage, not fatally, it's the last gunfight chapter in Hidden War, mind-blowing story. Mm-hmm. And then I talk about regulation and why it failed right after that, because it was a great chapter to follow up on. When I said, this guy's in the hospital now, recovering from gunshot wounds, where we had to engage. Very violent, same Sierra Azul mountainside on the Santa Cruz County side, where my partner was shot by realistically that same cell 10 years earlier in 2005 on the Santa Clara County side. And I'm in Montana decompressing for that week I'm off after that shooting, like shooting number 5 or whatever it's been for teammates and myself and whatever. And I get a call from my captain, and she's like, I can't believe I got to tell you this. What's up? How's everything going? Everybody's safe. We're getting ready to get back to work. You guys can't talk to ICE. You can't share anything about that suspect or any of the stuff you ran across in that grow, those people. That's just the way it is. And I'm like, well, did something change in writing on our policy that we're not going to work with federal agencies? It's mandated policy, under our current policy. No, nothing's changed. There's nothing in writing, but there will be disciplinary action taken if that were to happen. And I feel and she felt horrible. It was like a preposterous thing.
Out of her hands, too.
Out of her hands. But that came straight from the governor, clearly in the governor's office. And ultimately, our chief and our director work for the governor of California, which means we work for the governor of California as a state resource law enforcement agency, the law enforcement division in the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. So that sucked, having to call all my guys from God's country, basically processing the debrief of a mission it was our mission. No one else wanted to help after regulation. I brought the 3-dog super party pack of canines. We had 2 of our dogs and a sheriff's dog from Santa Clara County who had got a dog like us, because that area was aggressive. We called it Asshole Alley. That whole stretch of the Santa Cruz Mountains, it was going to be a fist fight. It was going to be trying to stab canines. It was going to be gunplay or a guy going for a gun. Mm-hmm. They were an aggressive cell. So we brought our whole team. Fish and Wildlife Met ran it. We got containment. We had to engage one suspect only. Nobody else was hurt. He wasn't fatally shot. We had to button it down with patrol wardens from all over the state for the night before DOJ could get out there to process it. But Tactically, everything went exactly like we wish it would have happened August 5th, 2005. And I call that gunfight number 2, Sierra Azul, 15 years later, in this book, because it was like, that's the culmination
Of all the hard
of
work.
all the training, all the tactics, all the mistakes, all the lessons learned. And I always say, if you're always willing to learn, and I know, Delta brothers, SF brothers, SEAL, they say, hey man, we're not going to win all the time. In our mind, we're going to win. We're going to win. We will not be defeated, but something can change. Murphy's Law will kick in. And as long as we do it safely and we learn from that mistake, if you want to call it that, we have failed forward. And I started to use that term immediately in the team as, guys, it's not always going to go right, because look at the environment we work in. You can't plan a mock-up. I can't build a perfect mock-up of like Osama bin Laden's fortress in Pakistan, and I can't practice on this grow site, because we're going to hit 200 of these this year, and they're going to be dense and wooded and different. We're going to have stream
Different
crossings,
weapons, different
locations, water barriers, we're going to have to run boats on. We might have to do some helicopter work. So it makes it awesome, but it also makes it imperfect, and it's an imperfect science. It really is. And our military brothers and sisters know it all too well too. So that was always the mindset. That was always the mindset. And when we got the hurdle that we couldn't talk to ICE, we said, okay, well, then we're just going to have to get these guys contained, get them arrested, put the best in-state case we can together, and do what we can. And now, fortunately, even in sanctuary states like California and some other sanctuary states, well, they're waking up federally, because the new AG is making it clear under the new president that nope, no, we don't care.
Yeah.
We're going to get them. We're going to work within your state boundaries. This is a terrorism, national security issue. And it's one thing to deny the reality. That's, I think, blasphemous, but it is what it is. It's another thing to keep our citizens, vulnerable, and keep our wildlife, waterways, and wild lands vulnerable. And it's got to stop. So it's kind of cool to see, when MET was at its beginning, and as we were doing so many missions, and showing the amount of damage, showing the depth of the destruction, and showing the effectiveness of why this team needed to be there, we were in the biggest lockdown from a sanctuary state standpoint at that time. We were. And that mindset in California hasn't changed politically, but the heat against that mindset has grown exponentially in both parties.
Seems like Newsom too is at least, he's the most politician, but he seems like he's at least opening up to the idea of, coming a little, because, it's where the wind's blowing. So I think that's how he sees it. But regardless, when you have a state like California that, as we've highlighted throughout, is just the perfect stomping ground for this. It's massive. It has the perfect climate. It has pretty much every avenue, angle, whatever that you could possibly want to use. It has the forested areas that are really good for being able to camouflage and hide everything.
Yeah.
You can't have a loose leadership with that state. You're just offering it up on a platter.
Reed, you hit it on the head, and this is the thing, man. I mean, I still consider California, my old home. And I know the diversity and the beauty of that state. I know the diversity of wildlife and wildland species. And to know that it's a failed state economically, politically, morality, the morale of citizens in California, especially rural citizens in Siskiyou County, Doris, California, any of these rural communities that epitomize why people came to California and wanted to settle here for life, right? Baby boomers, last greatest generation, so many World War II vets in like Siskiyou County. At all the, veteran affairs, town hall meetings. And when Jorge and I and Sonic were at that town hall meeting, the outrage and the fear and just them going off on the district attorney, because what's in their county now? Who runs it? And nothing's happening at the Sacramento level. Nothing. Because, nope, you're not going to regulate. You're not going to get any help. And guess what? Guess what we're not going to do? We're not even going to acknowledge there's a huge problem there. How do you say that if you are a citizen or you are a leader in California? Well, you don't. You shouldn't. I mean, it's just a no-brainer. So whatever way the political winds blow, whatever generates change in my old home state, the Golden State, I'm welcoming it. bring it because we need it. And the other thing is we're exemplary, especially on the cartel front, like you said, not only because we have all the other human trafficking, fentanyl, and we still have, the meth problem, but the environmental impacts from cannabis, I don't think any other state has the decimation and the impacts because of the amount of cannabis that's grown illegally in California over every other state, how long outdoor and indoor it goes, and the amount of water loss and destruction. We take the cake out on the West Coast. And that should be an example, like, don't make the mistake we did. Right the ship before it's too late.
And like talked about too, if Trump starts having live operations in Mexico, the state that's going to get hit the hardest, probably California, because it has the most military age individuals that are cartel connected. That when they get the green light, they're the ones that are going to be going forward.
Yeah, and that's the place that you got to think about. Is law enforcement equipped to handle that in California? Are citizens ready? If it hits cities, I mean, there's a lot of damage that could be done in the Southern California, urban areas of Southern Clarifia, and then in Northern California as well, Silicon Valley, right in my backyard. Imagine a terrorism attack there, even on
fifth largest economy in the world, essentially, right in that valley.
Yeah, right there. They don't have to make a big bang to make a big bang. So that's something we have to consider, and be prepared for.
So let me ask where the cartels, what we were touching on them shifting dynamics as, the more you guys are operating and they're pivoting the way that they're adjusting. Did you notice a change in terms of the weapons that you would find on site and what they're equipping with as well? Because they're recognizing this isn't just, a typical person walking across us in the woods. Now we're going against a militarized opponent that is on par, or even far exceeds us at this point.
Yeah, it was strange, man. I mean, sometimes you'd have everything as rudimentary in the grow sites that didn't have a lot of resources, or maybe their growers were being supplied with like deadly weapons, but not the best weapons. 22 long rifle, semi-automatic rifles, maybe a handgun, maybe a pretty beat up sawed-off shotgun, things like that, functional, but not a tactical weapon that if we did our part right, that we would have any issue dealing with. But then things did start to escalate because more good weapons were being moved around from the southern border, interdicted in like Arizona. There was some really high-end sniper rifles with medium to long range calibers. We're talking like 338 Lapua, 300 Win Mag. I mean, the stuff we on the sniper front are starting to shoot. The 300 PRC wasn't out, which is my go-to caliber now with my rifle sponsor, Altera Arms, just amazing. But bigger guns than that, right? Hand-loaded ammo, Swarovski range-finding binoculars. I mean, we're talking tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars. Was interdicted in Arizona many years ago, slated to go to grow sites and grow houses in California when it was interdicted down on the border with in Arizona. That was right when we were starting, Matt. We're like, oh, this is interesting. And then we'd go into grows, hypersensitive to some of this stuff, and we'd find that strategic kind of rock with debris lookout and binoculars sitting there in areas where you can see where maybe a rifle was set down, a bipod perhaps, where they were set up on an overwatch, and most teams would have taken basically the ridge they were looking at below them, maybe no more than a couple hundred yards away. And then we'd see in Asphalt Alley that I talked about in those Santa Cruz Mountains, we didn't see the little 22s. It was 12 gauge shotguns camouflaged. It was AK-47 derivatives and SKSs. It was like Mauser military bolt action guns. It was like, the shiny nickel, almost cartel cliche you'd see in Narcos, 45 ACP, like a Cartel's 45 pistol. It was stuff like that. So we started to see more, and then ARs, the M4 derivatives and things like that, we'd start to see in grows. And it just depended on what group you were working and how aggressive they were and what their mindset was. And it was a little bit different in all of them. I mean, clearly everyone was a deadly force threat because, 9 times out of 10, if we surprise them and they've got that gun, they're going to go for it. And 9 times out of 10, hopefully we're not going to have a gunfight because we have a dog and we've got cover and things like that. And in the situations where we don't have to shoot and we have no choice, that's where things escalate. But yeah, that whole area, ironically, and that wasn't Northern California, Shasta County, Siskiyou, all that area, a lot of guns, a lot of aggressive, more assault type weapons. And then ironically, right above the Silicon Valley and that stretch of Santa Cruz Mountains was nothing but heavy stuff, and bleeding over into Santa Cruz County as just some examples.
God, that's crazy. Because I would imagine, and there's obviously not tons of ways to verify this, but I would imagine, you were talking about the pipeline that gets created, right? So they start in Mexico, in the valleys of Michoacan or anything like that. They're growing in Sinaloa, and then, they become the guy, they get sent up north. I'm imagining once they start getting hit and they're like, hey, we're getting hit pretty hard here, they're probably picking some of their top sicarios as well and tossing them up north as well. People that are more militarized, have a better understanding of tactics. Like the idea that, they were creating sniper hides and overwatching, likely areas where you guys would be patrolling or reconning or whatever. I mean, that just showcases they're no longer, that shift from growers to a militarized force, and the way that they're approaching you guys addressing them.
Yeah, without a doubt. And that last gunfight I talked about, Sierra Azul, just over the mountain from the same area where my partner was shot in 2005 that we did in 2017 mission. I was with my team when our canine handler had to engage, and Marcos and myself and Rumble and another warden dealt with that. So once the scene was contained, we of course are gone because now we're going to go do our debrief. We're going to get interviewed because of a shooting investigation. But my assistant team leader, who later became the team leader and met behind me, Shang, his call sign in the book, he basically secured that grow site for the rest of the day with the rest of our team. Not only, overseeing the eradication, but clearing the rest of the grow we had not gotten into yet because it was a kitchen lower on the mountain we were working our way up to when this guy came down on us with a weapon out. And what was interesting is I got a call a little bit later while I'm sitting in like a waiting room to be interviewed at the district attorney's office, just taking calls, I'm talking to the chief and talking to the assistant chief and debriefing things because I can at least talk on my cell phone, but I can't be out there. And that's always frustrating, but it's just the way it has to go. And Shane just goes, dude, we are so lucky that we had that engagement down there, because up here, when you get to the bottom of the big grow site at the top of the mountain, you work through the grow site, and their encampment is in massive, super thick redwood trees that afford like a shade cave all hours of the day. And they have like a rifle sight, and he's sending me photos. And there's a rifle sight of where they lay in a depressed, with a little bit of berm in front of them in a depressed campground in their tent where they can lay right in their tent undetected. And they had an SKS. They had another bolt rifle, I believe. They had a shotgun, a handgun, I believe, as well. And lean over, and he goes, there's no way a team that isn't really trained and seen a lot of this would not got shot up, at least, because both trails would have led to them wanting to clear into this perfect canopy. And you don't even see the tents until you get into the point, till you get through the shade of the redwood forest, where you're now going to have to clear tents. And tents present a really weird problem because you kind of got to clear them like a building, but they have soft walls.
Just go right through,
Yeah. And you got to cut into them. You got to there's a lot of different tactics that I won't dive into, but so it was crazy. And there were all the guns. Now those guys had bugged out when their partner below, when it was going bang, bang down below. Fortunately, they left and they had two great escape routes behind that particular hide. But from a tactical preparedness standpoint, I was having flashbacks to when Mojo was ambushed behind that parapet, like I talk about in both books. And I'm like, here it is, here it is. Yeah, these guys know what they're doing. And they were prepared that if someone had been sneaking up in the morning and we had not already had a conflict, we were going to have a gunfight 20 minutes later than when the gunfight happened that day. And it would have been a lot worse because of the guns that were there. I like to think, knowing the site, looking at the site after the fact, looking at all the pictures, something I do for law enforcement teams especially is 4 of our 6 officer involved shootings. I have power debriefs, the diagrams, the play-by-play, trail indicators, what happened, what the transpiration was, what we learned, how it went, trauma response, all aspects. And that's the last one that I debrief. And I really, really analyze that one because it went so smoothly for us tactically. And it was probably tied for the top 10 most dangerous grows we'd ever entered, if not the most dangerous grow, at least while I was running the team. And I know they had a lot of heavy grows after. But yeah, it was an eye-opener, man, seeing that. And I'm like, okay, no one can tell me these guys aren't organized, prepared, and have some SOPs and are prepared. They're not randomly doing it. They're not like, oh, you're a good grower, take this 22 pistol and go guard the grow, but you better fight because
we'll be upset.
Because we'll be real upset or we're taking you out. That's not who these guys were. That place was, that was a big boys learning curve club up there in those mountains for sure.
Yeah, they're operating directly. It's like a military asset. And that's actually, that carries into what I wanted to ask with this is that, so obviously they're learning a lot of these tactics and everything with what's going on in Mexico, because in Mexico, they essentially can do whatever they want. It's a testing ground. They get to play around. They have grows there that are outrageous. We were talking about Narcos, the one infamous one that's miles long, and they have that, Is there any communication or understanding or like like Ed Calderon, he was on that Tijuana team. Like, is there communication on how Mexico is approaching this and we're looking to approach this, and either us giving advice on tactics or what some of these new approaches the cartels are taking, getting shuffled up to us? Because that feels like that would be such a necessary communication pipeline, because the shit they're bringing up north, they're testing and learning down south, Yeah.
That's a very good question. We did that in the 90s. Our special forces groups from Army SF, went to train Mexican militia police forces. It became the Los Zetas cartel. Mm-hmm. They branched off. Right. Ed talked about it. A lot of guys have talked about it, because I think at that time, Ed was probably dealing with those guys when they turned corrupt, if I'm not mistaken. We're sending Marine trainers down now to help Mexican authorities fight the cartels as well. And this debate just came up, and this is part of the new war on terrorism domestically, but working with Mexico as well. Do we have any concern that if we're going to send our SF guys down from a training advisory role only, that we're not going to create that again? I think there's always that potential, given the culture of Mexico and corruption.
And money talks.
And at the end of the day, especially down there, money talks, because it's so limited. And, you don't have to spend much time in Mexico to realize it's tough to live in Mexico. Mm-hmm. I've spent a ton of time in Mexico, both for work, for Baja races and everything else. Beautiful country, beautiful people, and they're under siege, as you know. I think at this point, because it's such an overt mission now for us as Americans, and we want to work with Mexico and commit real resources, I think this is the time, if it's ever going to work, it has to work now. Mm-hmm. That being said, whatever we train with down there, it would probably be a good play, if their administration goes for it, for our guys to be with them when they're doing raids, just like Green Berets do all over the rest of the world when we're in conflict, and actually where they're sanctioned to be. Because under the terrorism role and the definition, there should be no issue with that. Not, hey, we trained you, we gave you all the good equipment.
Yeah, good luck.
Good luck, and go be a $1 million Sicario, 2 weeks after I leave. No, go in, immerse with them, see that pride, test that out if we're going to do that. I know we want to avoid as much direct action ourselves as we need to, but I liken it to 3rd and 7th group being right with me on a grow site in Asshole Alley, that same place I'm talking about, not the gunfight mission, but the one the year before that, where we arrested 8 different suspects. We were having to borrow handcuffs to pull up from our military guys because there were so many bad guys and so many different mini grows and so many weapons, but nobody fired a shot. But I was literally shoulder to shoulder with 7th SF guys that are brothers now for life. And they were there sanctioned, and there was not a declaration of war on terrorism. That's just they can't directly engage. They were there under National Guard, reserve status, basically, counter drug. So they were there. They just cannot engage missions themselves. This changes. There's no reason why what we were doing with them then can't continue, and it's already continuing on the border. And I'm sure of these 6,000 military operators, whatever branch they're from, that they're immersed right with, Texas National Guard, right with Texas State Troopers, right with the game wardens, and we're all doing the same mission together. And that's a beautiful thing when you need guys that really know what they're doing and gals that really know what they're doing. So yeah, you're going to see that tactical problem continue to develop and push its way up north. And we need to shut it down as much as we can down there and fight it here, because there's no shortage of them. I can only guess what we're into the hundreds of thousands of operatives throughout America.
Yeah, and I'm imagining too, like this is the reason I was thinking that is because I imagine a guy like Ed, if he could give you a call when you guys are doing it, and he goes, "Hey, look, this is what we're starting to see. They're they're really pushing towards indoor grows, or they had that 2-man team moving, and now it's actually pushing 8 because they want to have this and this individual, or we're seeing weed grows mixing with mess shops because for some reason that's more it works better."
Yep.
That communication, I feel like, would be so critical for you guys, because then it's like, well, what are we expecting the way they're going to operate now? And then for them, because then we start talking tactics and they can nip it in the butt right away. And then, like any supply chain, if you can cut it off at the head right there, it's like that changes the whole dynamic. So
it does. Yeah. And it allows us to diversify resources and not, tie a bunch of operators up in one area while we play whack-a-mole like we've been doing in California since well before I started. I think that communication, that intel, if it's being shared through directives at the highest level, through Mexicans, the Mexican administration, the American administration, president to president, and all the way down to basically Homeland Security and everything else. Don't know if that's happening because I'm not privy to that, but I certainly hope it is. And I would imagine, given the cooperative nature of us even going down there to help train, that would be a given. So I would guess that is something that's going to happen if it's not already happening. I mean, almost must be with the firestorm of making this a priority, and not so hidden war finally, out in the light. So let's cross fingers and
pray.
And pray, brother, because it needs to happen. It's the only way we're going to make a dent. They have to be involved. We have to have Mexico's help.
That's what I wanted kind of wrapping up here, because we have laid out like the whole timeline, but looking at 2005, the really good callback in 2004, 2005, this is when Sinaloa is really just starting to get going and the power.
Yep.
Now you got Sinaloa, you got CJ&G, you got a number of other smaller plazas that are still just gaining power, and then with Elmayo Zambada just recently getting arrested, relatively recently, there's a whole civil war happening there. Like, it's only getting more chaotic, more powerful, more weapons, more money going on down there, that from, in this 20 years that it's been going, it's now or never. Like, we can't just keep sitting on it. So I think you make a fantastic point there. I guess, what is the situation on the ground today in terms of where's everything culminating, or in the past couple of years? Like, how much has the dynamic shifted in terms of the U.S. and the way that these kind of grows and operations are happening?
The biggest shift is the shift to private land, because states continue to regulate, like domino effect, and they always repeat what California did after Colorado, after Oregon. We're making regulation easy. We're making it easy to poach. We're making it easy to do it illegally. And we're making it hard for regulators, because we're looking at the money, and we know that if we still keep the political ideas, if you still label a felony anything to do with cannabis, it's going to deter people from wanting anything to do with regulated cannabis. And that's not the case if it's done right. I mean, obviously, if you keep the felony statute in trespass illegal growing, and you show growers doing it by the numbers, spending their $80,000 to $150,000 in permits from 11 agencies, whatever it is, doing seed to sale tracking, paying their taxes, doing all their environmental safeguards and protection in place, they're like, hey man, audit me. I'm good. This is fine. Oh yeah, that guy that just parked camp next to me that I don't recognize the language in the middle of the night, and there was gunfire or whatever, and now there's the Chinese element just showed up in this part of Shasta County. And it's an unregulated grow house making millions of dollars and dangerous, non-taxed, poisoned. That guy can go to jail. That guy can be shut down. You can't do that with misdemeanor statutes. You can't do it with infractional statutes for juveniles. So I think that needs to be the shift. We need to look at private land, because that's kind of the low-hanging fruit right now. It's not hard to find them, but you got to look at a complete restructuring of how we look to regulate cannabis. And quite honestly, since states are doing it state by state by state, and they all seem to get sucked in to, wow, man, here's a projection of how much money we can make if we regulate this way. But man, don't make it a felony because you're going to have that, that less group. You're not going to not have as many jumping into the industry, right? That's the problem. So we just keep doing the same thing state to state. So really until we do that federal regulation structure like we talked about and take the bite out of the crime aspect of it. And, you don't make it any less a penalty because you can buy, quality controlled cannabis joints, Marlboro Greens or whatever at your local liquor tobacco store of age through all the safeguards. But it's still a felony to grow it in the outdoors. It's still a felony to grow it unregulated in black market.
Illegally.
Yeah, you just have to. It really needs to be a shift, and I think eventually we're going to get there.
So, I know Rogan loved to say this a ton. If you had the magic wand, do you think that would be the first thing if you had to push something for Trump? Because we're already talking. He's looking to do the operations and all that. Like he's really expanding there. If you had that magic wand, are you talking to Trump and saying, hey, I think a federal regulation following these patterns would be the best?
I do. That's the best solution, given the situation we're in, for the cannabis front. That's not going to deal with fentanyl or, P2P super meth or human trafficking, which are killing more people than cannabis are, but none of that is affecting the wildlife, the triple W's, like, we on the Game Warden front are so passionate about. So yeah, that's going to be a big environmental switch right now. Because you're not going to see these ad hoc water stealing ranchettes, that look like, rundown, just crazy shacks in Northern California and these hoop houses. You're going to see a very structured way of how cannabis is produced, just like tobacco, just like cigarettes, for those that want to consume it. That would be the thing there. And then the other thing on the magic wand, and Julian asked me the same thing, and my whole thing has been this hidden war can't be hidden. It's got to be a national priority. And now it is.
Yep.
And now we're looking at how far do we push? When do we pull back because of inherent dangers on both sides of the border for our citizens and also international relations? I think that's a good problem to have because I think logic will play out. I mean, Trump's pushing, we're the common sense party. And so far, everything we've been doing, to me, at least in my eyes, is pretty common sense. We're addressing the public safety issues, right? Nobody's eliminating regulated cannabis in the state by state level right now. We're looking at the bigger picture of that and looking at individual situations like you just mentioned. What do we do for cannabis from the wildlife protection standpoint and regulation standpoint to get the cartels out of that? And then as long as there's a demand for those other things, especially human trafficking and fentanyl right now, that needs to be completely a waged war. Find out where it's being produced and eliminate it. Cut the head off the snake in Mexico, cut the head off the snake in America if you need to, if it's happening here. Educate our children, educate our educators, have emergency rooms, have medical facilities with antidotes, with, the reversal, the Narcan agents. If anybody's exposed to this, law enforcement training just has to continue to evolve because now there's derivatives of fentanyl with added chemicals and added
carfentanyl.
Yeah.
All that shit, man.
That's another 40 times more dangerous if you get even less on and you don't have a real thick nitrile and cops that are just dropping over.
And easy to bring right up the border.
Yeah.
I'm smaller.
Just smaller. So that's where we have to go. And I do think in the magic wand, don't do this alone. We need Mexico and whatever happens in Canada or not as another American state or a Canadian sovereign nation, whatever's best for, everybody up there. I'm not pushing one way or the other on that, but I'm saying
my ultimate dream is Mexico and Canada. We just become a giant country.
If it was good for those two countries,
yes,
and we weren't forcing our way there, absolutely.
I think it'd be awesome.
Yeah, I mean,
everything.
Just the human safety standard, the living standard, the health standard, everything, anything we could do without being that, that dictator push. Economically, too, all of it.
We'd have access to everything. It's a pipe dream, but I would love it.
No, Reed, but you hit it from the self-sustainability and not outsourcing everything with that added manufacturing component. I mean, we're going even further into the story, but it's a good thing you brought that up. You attack this global problem that especially in the Western hemisphere, the Northern hemisphere especially, U.S., Canada, and Mexico, where we're kind of the playground for the cartels as a whole.
Yep. China's
laughing at us and using and eroding, like we said in the beginning of the conversation, from within. Sinaloa, Jalisco New Generation, all those cartels are capitalizing now and merging with China. So yeah, it would be a force multiplier, and that might be a dream situation. Thinking as a domestic American, that might be a good thing if it was agreeable to the masses. But I think overall, that's what we need to do. And I think we're on our way to doing it. I think this administration, if they stick to their guns and do it with a little bit of common sense and diplomacy, we're going to be in good shape. We've at least, in 55 days or whatever it's been of Trump's presidency, how quickly the border got secured to an all-time low, that 98+% of all illegal crossings are now stopped. That didn't take long when you just made it. And and you know what's funny? It didn't take that many more resources. So 6,000 military operators, in addition to all the agents that were already down there, with a dedicated mission, with morale skyrocketing again, everybody feeling like they're protecting the country, and they're protecting immigrants, and they're protecting unprotected minors that are coming across. That whole issue, talk about disgusting. And we've made that much of a dent. That's not a lot of resources. That's not a lot of time. That tells you, like anything, right? With Met, once we got the green light, we were on hyperdrive. And that's what Trump's doing with this issue. And it's beautiful to see, because people are starting to have a little bit of hope. And I hope it continues in a good direction.
Well, John, brother, I couldn't agree more. And I want you to know that you're a pivotal part of this as well. The fact that you're willing to come on the show, spread the message, and how hard you push for it. You could tell your passion across the board. And, for me and all the viewers, I want to say thank you for that as well, because getting the conversation started, as you highlighted, is the first step and one of the most critical steps. And for you to be able to, push it to where it's gotten, and, we're finally seeing progress. It's amazing. I really think it's going to be, over the next 5-10 years, a massive change in a positive direction for the country, for us and Mexico. So yeah, just wanted to say thank you for that.
Thanks, man. No, and thank you, Reed, for having me on, and really for being that pin that's mightier than the sword. Right now, podcasting outside of mainstream media, where we can talk raw and real, put far more information out, far less biased information out, if we're just speaking freely. Not in every space. We all have our opinions, of course, but I can't thank you enough for doing what you're doing, having me on, and being part of the Thin Green Line, brother. Thank you.
I appreciate it, my man. Let everyone know where they could find you. We'll have the links down below, but I know, you want to shout out to YouTube and everything as well. Some awesome content on there. So I want to make sure people are able to see.
You bet. On social media, I'm on Facebook and Instagram, John Norris, at John Norris, JOHNNORES. Look for the blue check, because there's a lot of imposters. There are a lot of people trying to solicit money from friends, and I feel horrible about that. YouTube channel is just Thin Green Line, John Norris again. Website, go through my website at www.johnnorris.com. If you're interested in personalized copies of Hidden War 2nd edition, you can get to me through my website and email. You can get the book on Amazon in print copy, Kindle, and I got to read and narrate the Audible version, which was just
that's so important,
so fantastic. Yeah. It was really, really fun to do with a Billboard artist, record producer, Trammell Starks, a good friend out of Atlanta, who did an original score. He did the sound effects with the water through the pipes, the creaks, the gunplay, the helicopters, the canines, animal sounds. He made it like you're listening to a movie. He did a really good job. And so you get the Audible there. And that's the new book.
Perfect, my man. Well, like I said, we're definitely going to get you back on soon, because I feel like we just barely scratched the surface today, too.
Look forward to coming back, man.
And looking forward to it, my man.
Thank you.